This story begins with the death of the goblin leader, which the others were visibly happy about, and one of them got his club. Now he was supposed to become the leader, but the others were against it, which caused enmity between the comrades. Suddenly they remembered the leader's prey, which was untouched, and decided to take it as quickly as possible. But everyone immediately froze, remembering that the guy protecting her should be back any minute now. When the goblin arrived to protect the prey, he was immediately insulted because he covered his body like a human. They were also sure that he knew where the loot was hidden and wanted to grab it for himself, so they decided to follow him and take it away. There was talk that someone had already gone there, and they decided to wait until the others started fighting. Hearing this, the guard immediately ran to the prey, hearing a female voice calling for help. Several goblins surrounded her as the girl cried and screamed that she didn't want to have children from goblins. The guard asked her to move away from her, but the goblins were sure that if the leader was dead, then this prey now belonged to them. And if he dared to take her away from them, he would die, after which several goblins attacked their comrade. The hero couldn't believe that such low-level goblins could actually kill him, but he promised himself that he wouldn't die here. With a sharp movement, he pulled out his blade, taking the life of his comrade, and was sure that the others would also die if they did not let him pass. Frightened, the goblins immediately began to run, since they themselves were unarmed, but promised to return. The girl who ran up to him began to thank him for saving her, noticing that he really was different from the other goblins. Suddenly, the hero saw a system window in front of him and remembered that he had once been a human being. However, he didn't expect that instead of meeting God after being hit by a truck, he would be transported to another world with the system, but it had not yet been fully activated. It doesn't even have any functions other than viewing some statistics. However, he had not been sitting idle for the past few days and had gotten some information from what this girl had told him. In this world created by the gods, there are many different monsters, but humans still won their place on this continent through their strength, and goblins are considered the weakest and most vile of all the monsters in this world. His stats are really weak now. Even normal goblins can kill him, but there is a way to become stronger. Goblins have the ability to become stronger through constant mating and reproduction. However, there are no females among them. Therefore, they use women of other races for reproduction, and this is what makes them constantly engage in robbery. Suddenly, the girl said that, having spent these days with him, she understood everything, that he did not want to live with the rest of the goblins. She asked him not to worry because when the knights came for her, she would tell them that he had been saving her all this time. Since the system has not yet been fully activated, he needs to hold out until people come and he receives their protection. Suddenly, the guard felt that the goblins were returning and quickly asked the girl to hide. However, the goblin managed to notice the person and wanted to get her, because becoming stronger means not dying. But as soon as he approached, the guard swung his weapon, taking his life, and he also noticed that people had come to save the girl. Most likely it was a sacred order, which caused a smile to appear on the girl's face. At that very moment, a man appeared in front of them and swung his sword, destroying several goblins at once. Turning around, the knight noticed with displeasure that they had torn the cloak of the Holy Order. The Guardian had never seen such high figures since he came to this world, and had no doubt that this knight was definitely human. Noticing him, the girl immediately began waving her hand and calling him, hinting about her safety. At first, the hero was also delighted, but then he sensed something was wrong and rushed to the girl to save her from the sword swing. He was supposed to save her, but instead he attacked. Maybe it was too dark in the cave, and that's why he mistook her for a goblin. The man felt ashamed as the goblin was able to dodge his attack while the girl said her name. However, he knew that it was Kelia, but she had already been defiled by goblins, and perhaps she even carried one of them under her belly. It was ridiculous for such a dirty creature as she to expect mercy from him, so he offered to repent of his sins before the great Holy Mother. Kelia began to cry and tried to convince the commander that, although the goblins had kidnapped her, they had not defiled her, and it was all thanks to the guard. Pointing her finger at him, she tried to explain that this goblin was protecting her and not allowing others to do whatever they wanted. But Loder didn't believe her and suggested that she come up with something more convincing, after which he wanted to finish what he had started. Jumping up from his place, the guard pushed the girl back, asking her to run, as there was another way out. Grabbing a club, he began to fight the knight, although he did not expect such an outcome. Suddenly, a female voice asked the knight to stop, as this goblin seemed a little strange to her. The cell immediately began to crawl towards the Holy Virgin, asking her to save her from a terrible fate. At that very second, the woman turned to the goblin, deciding to find out if he understood her words. She is the Holy Maiden of Ephraia, the representative of the temple he was told about. If he wants to survive, then she is his only chance. The guard immediately gave an affirmative answer, after which he tried to convince her that he was not a monster and had once been a man. He became like this because of one incident and will be able to explain everything if he goes with them. Goblins are usually stupid and low-minded and are unable to think or speak so fluently. Then Freya decided to ask Kelia if he really had not harmed her, to which she received a detailed explanation. It seemed like it was really special, so it was decided to take it with us and study it before making a decision. The guard was glad that at least someone here was able to listen to the voice of reason, since he too could go with them and prove his innocence. Freya ordered the knight to return back, after which they all headed towards the exit. At this time, the guard began to thank her for her kindness and asked her to be sure that he would repay her for it. Hearing the agreement, the goblin froze in place, then turned around, noticing how Loder pierced Kelia's stomach with a sword. He was overcome with fear when the Holy Virgin, smiling, declared that when they returned, he would repay them well for everything. A week later, Loder came out into the square, telling the people that the previous goblin raid had brought great harm to this bright city. The goblins made a sneak attack and killed 30 of the villagers, which immediately made the people angry at them. The whole crowd insulted the goblins, concluding that they were their mortal enemies. However, the Holy Order carried out the temple's order and destroyed these goblins, so they avenged the fallen. Freya stepped forward, suggesting that everyone continue to visit the temple, as they would always protect their followers. A little later, the girl realized that today's sermon had been quite successful because people were stupid, as always. Now, they will pray even more and bring more to the relationship. Suddenly, a voice was heard from the dark part of the room. It was the chained goblin who was insulting Freya. She was surprised that he was still alive, but it was no surprise that they still couldn't get rid of them from the continent. Then the girl stood up from her seat and decided to find out how the poison would affect the goblin. Freya deceived everyone and killed Kelia, and this vaunted sacred order of theirs dares to call itself justice. Freya hit him, saying that a worthless creature like him did not dare to speak of human justice. The Kelia was bewitched by him, dared to speak for him. This is a betrayal towards humanity and the sacred order. Goblins are the real pests on this continent, and she's doing him a huge favor by talking to him now. He should be grateful and offer his disgusting little body as an offering to contribute to human experiments. At that very moment, Freya created a seal around the hero, causing him unbearable pain. As a human who was reborn as a low-level goblin, he foolishly relied on human compassion, thinking that they were righteous and kind. He was too weak and naive, and this played a cruel joke on him. Loder and Freya tortured him and did not believe a single word. But he couldn't hold out for long because that girl hounded him to death, and if he was given another chance, he would never trust people. The hero would have definitely ground their bones and drunk their blood if only he had another life. Suddenly, the goblin opened his eyes, finding himself in some space, and tried to understand where he had ended up. Suddenly, a system that had only been activated after his death appeared in front of him, and now an assessment was being carried out. She can bring him back to life, but it seems he will be reborn again as a lower creature, a goblin. And if he refuses, then his soul will die forever. And if he agrees, then it will retain the current memory and system and return back a week ago. Now he understood everything. This was an opportunity to take revenge on those who had mocked him so much, so the hero agreed. The goblin's new life begins, and to help him live at least a little longer, the system made him a little stronger. Returning a week ago, the guy immediately felt the changes, although small, but it was better than nothing. Even though he was reborn, the danger was not over yet. The sacred order was about to reach the master. The owner of the system is able to create a simulation to anticipate future events, and each choice leads to different results. Each simulation will play out for the next 24 hours, after which he will receive points that he can exchange for items. He decided to start the simulation, and the system suggested that he take the following actions. He could warn his fellow goblins and unite, leave the rest of the goblins and escape on his own, or hide deeper in the cave and pray. Although he has 3 options, even if they unite, the goblins still won't be able to deal with Loder. Only by escaping themselves can he be guaranteed to survive. At first, the hero decided to simulate the option with the most points, and if he could exchange them for a weapon, he might be able to defeat them with a surprise attack. As expected, by relying on the goblins, he would have no chance of defeating them, but at least he earned points. Having opened the exchanger, the hero noticed a huge amount of weapons, but he had too few points. He ended up acquiring an elven blade, which is different from the weapons goblins are used to, but can still kill a knight. Then the hero decided to ask the system why Kelia was not here and where she went. Due to the master's rebirth, some details of the timeline have changed. Kelia was not captured by the goblins, so she lives a happy life. It seems like he did fulfill his promise to her, in which case he has nothing to worry about anymore. The hero will be able to survive and escape, This is the narrowest passage. The entrance from the outside is smaller, so there should be less security here. Meanwhile, two warriors stood outside discussing goblins and their work. They also discussed the order that any girl who tried to escape during this chaos was to be killed and not allowed to reach the village. Hearing this, the hero realized that for the sake of its dominance, the Holy Order was ready to kill even its own, not to mention him. He had no choice but to fight, so he loudly asked for help, adding that he had been kidnapped from the Holy City. One of the knights immediately approached the cave and asked with a smile to come out, although he was holding a knife behind his back. But before he could finish speaking, the goblin suddenly pierced him with his blade, for he had returned to take revenge. The second knight did not understand why his comrade froze in place, since he could not see anything from his angle, and asked him to hurry. The hero just smiled, after which he pushed the closest knight, which stunned the second one. He didn't expect to see a goblin in front of him, which is why he didn't have time to defend himself and received a serious wound. The man asked to leave and showed him a photograph of his wife and daughter, who were waiting for him at home. The goblin is smart and should understand him. He is just following orders, and he was forced to come here. Holding a knife behind his back, the knight tried to convince him that he would receive gold and a young girl if he left him alive. But when the man decided that the goblin was distracted, he wanted to strike. But the hero was faster and took the knight's life. Suddenly, a flash of light appeared nearby, and the hero recognized the voice of Loder, who was coming here. Having taken the clothes of one of the knights, he was sure that they would soon meet and the hour of reckoning would come. A little later, Loder and Ephraia approached the knights' bodies, surprised that the goblins had slipped past them. The girl suggested that it looked like the work of mutants, but there was no exact evidence. If they escaped, then things are bad, and these knights were unable to defeat the mutant goblins. Ephraia immediately became eager to get the mutant goblin, because if they caught one, they would be able to have a lot of fun with him. Towards evening, the hero realized that he was saved, and since they hated goblins so much, he would treat them like goblins. Goblins are able to become stronger by mating and devouring, increasing their characteristics. He will be able to breed stronger offspring and expand his influence. In this life, he will make every human man's only wish be death, and he will make girls wail at his feet. Suddenly, the hero heard rustling in the bushes and decided that Loder was still looking for him with his people. He needed to strike first to gain an advantage, but the man standing before him was far from a knight. Seeing the attacker, the mysterious girl became frightened and stumbled, and the hero was surprised that she could talk. It was a goblin with feminine features, although goblins only produce males, so they can only reproduce with other species. The girl raised herself and asked him not to hit her, since she was only there to get some water. He didn't understand how a goblin could speak so well, and he also noted that if he married her, he would become a legendary goblin god. Suddenly, the girl began to tremble and said that she had been sent to get water, and if she did not do so, the chief would kill her. The hero immediately began to apologize and calm her down, after which he patted her on the shoulder in a friendly manner and asked her not to cry. After all, if she continues to cry, she might attract the attention of Loder and his soldiers. Suddenly, the girl's eyes lit up when she found out that he could talk too. The others only beat and scold her, but he was the first one who took such tender care of her, so she offered to return with her to her tribe. The hero wasn't sure whether he was being followed or not, but now he needed to find a safe place. He was only concerned about where he could find subordinates, so he asked to be taken there. A little later, the other goblins noticed that the hero was dressed like a human, and they began to insult the girl. There are quite a lot of goblins in this tribe, so the hero decided to start here, and he already had a plan. He came to join them, so he immediately decided to find out who was in charge. However, it was impossible to just go and meet the chief whenever he wanted, so the goblins immediately grabbed their weapons. The girl suddenly stood up for him, and the voice asked why they were all gathered here. The goblins immediately rejoiced when they saw the chieftain, who was a level 25 priest. Looking at his characteristics and abilities, the hero was surprised that there was such a strong goblin in this tribe. The leader was surprised that the girl brought a stranger, but the thing was that he had nowhere else to go. It was then announced that they would kill him and have a feast, which made the other goblins very happy. The hero stopped them, explaining that he knew how to make weapons and asked for permission to join them to make them stronger. The leader approached the guy and assumed that he didn't even smell like such abilities, but he became interested in what exactly he could create. If they find iron ore, he will make simple household tools for them, but it will take a little time. If the tribe has iron tools, they will be able to cope with any monsters and people. The goblins realize that with iron weapons, they don't have to fear people and they can even deal with elves. The leader decided to give him a chance. Within 3 days, he must get iron ore and make a weapon. Then he will stay alive. But if he fails, they will kill him and the goblin girl, after which the leader turned around and returned to the tent. With the hero's current strength, he won't be able to confront them directly, so he will buy time and create weapons to become stronger. The next evening, the girl asked me to wait for her because she had been on the road all day and was very tired. However, the goblin immediately threw her to the ground and began to beat her, explaining that if she could not find the ore, she would die. The girl promised that she would remain silent, but her comrades had already gotten a taste for it and began to beat her even harder. The hero immediately threw a stone at the goblin's head, declaring that they were going with him to find ore and not to cause trouble here. He had already explained to them where to look for it, so each of them had to bring him at least a piece in order to survive. Noticing the iron weapon in the guy's hands, the goblins were noticeably frightened, but promised to kill him in the future. The hero knew they were right, so he had to kill them before he could make the weapon. It was time to become stronger, and he remembered that if a goblin man marries a goblin woman, the man will become a goblin god. He found out that the girl's name was Yue and asked her not to cry because he had a plan. He decided to find out if she wanted to be with him, because that way she would be able to eat meat every day and live in warmth, and no one would touch her anymore. But he is ready to keep his word, but he is still too weak, so he really needs her help. The girl became interested in how he could become stronger, and this was only if she wanted to have children from him. Yue immediately became embarrassed because she had never tried anything like this. But the most important thing was her desire. Leaning closer, the hero kissed Yue on the lips, and she did not resist. After breaking the kiss, she stated that she wanted him to become stronger, so she asked for permission to bear him a child. They will have 7 children, so he has raised his level. In addition to this, he has improved his form, and the chances of winning have increased significantly. A little later, Lin declared that he would always protect her, and Yue fell in love with him even more. Suddenly, they heard someone's cry for help nearby and noticed a goblin running away from a demonic wolf. Lin noticed that he had found iron ore, but he had also brought trouble with him. The hero immediately grabbed the weapon and instantly ran up to him and thrust the knife straight into the beast's neck. When it was all over, Lin approached his comrade and demanded that he give him the ore, noticing that he was shaking violently. The hero praised him, promising that if he found more ore, he would make a weapon for him. Back at camp, Lin began crafting items while the other goblins watched him closely. He was able to create a spear with which he pierced the wolf's skull, and declared that it was a weapon he had made from iron ore. One of the goblins confirmed the guy's words because he himself killed the demonic wolf and saved them all. Lin decided to play with them and raised the spear above his head, asking if they wanted to have it, to which he heard approving cries. Watching this, the leader praised the guy, although he did not expect that he was really such a master. But if he wants to stay here, it's not that simple. His next task will be to make 50 guns in 2 days. The other goblins became curious about why the leader was so cruel, and they decided to help Lin with the making. After 2 days, he was able to make 50 copies, while the younger goblins loudly praised him. The chief praised him again, and announced that today everyone should have enough food and they would celebrate Lin joining them. A little later, Yue wanted to feed him, because this sacrifice was especially for him. But as soon as he bit off a piece of meat, he immediately felt sick, and the girl became frightened, looking at him. Suddenly, the leader came up to them and laughed, because he thought that this guy would be smarter. The goblin noticed the boy's aspirations, and since he dared to encroach on his authority, things would not end well for him. At that very second, he grabbed Yue and decided to test this girl, to see how good she was. However, his laughter was cut off by a whistling sound. Lin swung his blade and cut off the chieftain's hand. To everyone's surprise, the guy was completely fine, because he had known for a long time that he would poison the meat, so he was just playing. The leader was silent for a while, gathering all his anger together because he did not expect such an outcome. Then he jumped up from his seat and declared that he would kill the guy, rushing at him with all his might. Lin easily dodged his attack, then turned around sharply and stabbed him in the neck with his blade. When the leader was defeated, the boy announced that from that day on, he was their new leader and would help them fight the elves and people. He ordered them to mate because now they would always have meat, which made the other goblins happy. He then pointed to the deceased chieftain and announced that this gift was especially for them. The goblins immediately began to devour the body, but leading the tribe is only the beginning of his revenge. The next target is the elven tribe. Meanwhile, not far from them, an elf hid behind the bushes, watching what was happening and trying to understand what had happened. Sometime later, she returned home, and the girl at the door greeted the princess. She wanted to stop her, but the princess had something important to report. Entering the room, she tried to report to her mother what was happening in the enchanted forest to the east. But as soon as she saw her mother surrounded by several elves, she immediately blushed and apologized. However, the woman stopped her, noticing that her daughter was in a hurry, so she decided to find out what was going on. Kasana tried to calm down and reported the goblin tribe she had discovered. Mother didn't attach much importance to this because she didn't understand what weak and dirty monsters could do. But this morning the princess found a huge bear in the enchanted forest. There were signs of a struggle at the scene, and the smell of goblins was everywhere. The bear is the most ferocious beast in the enchanted forest, and the goblins would never be able to deal with it on their own. But a few days ago she saw that the old head of the goblins was killed by some youth. It must be because of him that the goblins became stronger. The woman realized that the goblins had begun to regain their strength, and asked her daughter to gather a team and kill them. Suddenly she added that the potion prepared from goblin hearts was an excellent tonic for the males of their tribe. The woman smiled and offered to reward her daughter with a handsome elf, because she had worked so hard. Kasana blushed again and declared that she still had to go to the evening checkup, so she would make do. Meanwhile, the goblin tribe chief was informed that there were about 30 elven tree structures in the forest. Lin promised to bring them 2 elves very soon, so they should get ready. The goblins immediately began to praise the new leader and decided to prepare their weapons for battle. There are only 30 elven houses, each with about 2 elves living in it, which makes a total of 60 of them, and they also have mines. After the death of the previous leader, he led the goblins to obtain weapons and hunt monsters to level up. By killing various monsters, Lin gained new skills and also increased his level. His tribe was happy to help with this, as he gave them food and what they wanted. And over time, even weak goblins were able to raise their level and become noticeably stronger. The elf's total combat power was only 200 units, while the goblin's total combat power was 250. The systemic hypothermia was complete. He was going to sneak attack the elves after all, so caution wouldn't hurt. In the current plot, he leads an entire army of goblins to attack a tribe of elves, but even so, the elves will notice him, and then he himself will be trapped. After his capture, the leader of the elves will hang him for all to see, and after that there will be a certain death. Lin thought everything would go smoothly, but he found himself in a trap for which there was no reward in sight. This is exactly the ending that awaits them, when suddenly the guy felt that someone was watching them. Goblins have a very keen sense of hearing and sensitivity, and if he concentrates, he can find clues. After activating the skill, he sensed something hidden behind the bushes nearby. Meanwhile, Kasana knew that the goblins wanted to attack their tribe, so she needed to tell her mother about everything. But before she could finish speaking, arrows hit her and her comrades, knocking them off their feet. As the princess crawled on the ground, she realized that they were being attacked with poisonous arrows, but she was still conscious. Lin didn't think it would be so easy to catch them, and they arrived just in time. Looking at the elf, the guy ordered the goblins to grab them, and his subordinates immediately headed forward. A little later, the girl was awakened with the help of goblin liquid, which has a special effect on elf girls. The subordinates saved the elf especially for the leader, as they were waiting for him. Grabbing her chin, Lin realized that their chances of defeating the elves were improving imperceptibly. Waking up, Kasana menacingly asked how they dared to kidnap the princess, while also planning an attack on their clan. Now they can't expect mercy from their mistress because she won't forgive them. And if even a hair falls from her head, they won't live. Lin just smiled when he heard about the pardon, since they were now in a more advantageous position. She may consider them her subjects, but his subordinates disagree. Kasana suddenly remembered her mother's words, asking her not to forget to leave a few goblins alive. Obviously, the elves could have destroyed all the goblins in the forest, but there are too many goblins in the jungle, and it is not easy to kill them all. However, the guy decided not to rush and show everything to the princess in the evening. He then returned and asked his subordinates to eat the other 2 elves and absorb their skills. Kasana realized that she was an arrow, and after a while, Lin's level rose to 30, and he reached the highest level. Meanwhile, in the elves' house, the men told the queen that they couldn't go on like this any longer. She was sorry to hear this, because if she had known about it, she would have caught more goblins. She then asked her subordinate if Kasana had returned yet, as she should have returned a long time ago. Then the elf suggested sending the lady several people to catch the goblins and raise the level. Finding no other way out, the woman agreed to send several boys to her daughter. Suddenly, someone's voice declared that Kasana would not return, and the subordinate elf immediately grabbed his blade. Suddenly, an arrow flew out of the shadows and hit the elf in the head, while the queen managed to catch the arrow flying at her. Then she saw a goblin who said that he had captured Kasana and that they would soon have children. Grabbing the sword, the elf immediately began to ask what he had done to her daughter. Not hearing a specific answer, she declared that she would kill him, after which she rushed into the attack. Lin calmly dodged, explaining that her tribe had already been captured, and it was time for her to join them. The woman immediately fell to the ground, her body unable to obey due to the paralyzing arrow. There was a goblin seed on the arrow, and if it hit her body, it would immediately go numb, so she should be more careful. Lin had heard something about the awakening potion, and that's how they used it, but she didn't expect that one day the goblins would come to settle scores with them. The woman immediately realized that this was the very new head that Kasana had spoken of. Suddenly they heard voices outside, and Lin concluded that the time had come. He led the queen to the window, inviting her to discuss cooperation. The elf's eyes widened as she noticed the goblins outside killing her subjects. She immediately became embittered, and Lin explained that the goblins had become equal to the elves and they could not defeat them. When the elves were stronger, they killed the goblins. Now it's the other way around. So he advised them to quickly come to terms with the new reality. He needs the goblins to become stronger, so he needs her help, and their lives depend entirely on her. During this time, the goblins continued to mercilessly deal with elven men and abuse women. Realizing that there was no other choice, the queen asked him to do whatever he wanted with her, so that her children would live. She is ready to sacrifice herself and bear them children, just to stop this massacre. The next day, the queen found herself locked in a cage with her daughter, under the care of the goblins. She began to apologize to Kasana because it was all her fault. She underestimated the goblins and did not think that they would become stronger. And now, among the elves, there are only defenseless children and women. And as a result, they will have to cooperate with the goblins. At this time, the goblins swarmed around the elven women until they were too weak to resist. From now on, they will live among them, which made Kasana cry bitterly. Lin announced that they were now living here and he would provide them with 3 meals a day, but if they went crazy, they were not to be blamed. The queen understood everything, but she had one request: to take care of the children because they belonged to her. Lin turned his gaze to Yue, noticing her playing with the goblin children. He decided that it was all because of the characteristics, and Yue said that she couldn't take care of them herself. Having given his consent, the guy decided to wait until the children grew up, and then he would be able to elevate the family. He decided to look at the value of the characteristic, and the system congratulated him on his advanced training. Lin upgraded his skill to the highest level, and the points he had recently acquired were converted into his power. It seems he needs to hurry up with the production of children. Even with his current strength, he can already crush Loader, but that will be after the elves grow up. Half a month later, the elves were still in the cages and continued to give birth to children. When one of them saw her child, she immediately grimaced in disgust and declared that she did not need this child. Lena began to ask how many newborns they had, to which they received the answer that there were about 30 or 40. Suddenly, they heard a shrill scream and realized that it was coming from Kasana. The queen immediately turned to the guy and asked him to help her. This is her first birth, so it is very difficult for her. Without a moment's hesitation, Lin entered the cage and asked the princess to spread her legs, after which he began to deliver the baby. The girl screamed that she couldn't take it anymore, but the guy asked her to shut up, because these were his children too. When it was all over, Yue started praising the leader, even though it was nothing to him. Suddenly they heard another scream and noticed that 2 goblins had surrounded the girl. Lin immediately threatened them with his sword, reminding them that they needed to wait until they recovered and rested, otherwise they would die. From now on and forever, they cannot dare touch the elves without his knowledge. The queen noticed that he was different from the other goblins, but the boy had to do it because everyone needs rest. After the elves became pregnant, they gave birth to healthy goblins with stronger qualities. Seeing the tribe members growing stronger, Lin decides to take revenge on Loader by heading to Guangming City alone. Although he is currently the same as Loader, the strength of his comrades should not be underestimated. But as long as his stats allow him to kill Loader, he can try to reproduce the plot. Finally, he got a moment when Loader was left alone. The guy decided to attack, but at that moment, the assistant appeared and attacked him. The Holy Swordswoman saved the night, and Lin lost his life. And soon the brave group entered the capital and never appeared again. The guy didn't understand where the Holy Swordswoman came from, and he didn't think that Loader and his comrades would leave the city because they wouldn't be found again. Even if he didn't stand a chance against the powerful swordswoman, he still had to hurry. Then he decided to bypass the territory of people, while Yue would have to manage the tribe. But this would only be for a few days. Hearing this, the queen decided that the guy had gone crazy because if he went to human territory, he would be killed immediately. Then the woman decided to help him, offering to use stealth skills so that people would not notice him. This is exactly what the guy was waiting for, although he didn't think that she cared so much about his safety. The woman began to cast a spell, fearing that if Lin died, they would be impregnated here until they died. Moreover, they and the children will hope that Daddy will return safe and sound. Throwing his cloak on, he heard behind him that Yue would take care of the tribe. Once he reached the city, Lin watched the knights walking along the street. It was clear that the patrols had strengthened their defenses. It was quite possible that the Holy Swordswoman was already here. The guy asked everyone questions for a long time, but no one had heard of her, which was very strange. Suddenly, he noticed a crowd of people gathered around the board that had Guangming's rating on it. Loader rose again and even took the lead, leading the gold level. Now the guy needs to find clues, otherwise the revenge plan will fail. As Lin passed by the tavern, he stopped when he heard a man shouting loudly that he was treating everyone. A smile blossomed on the goblin's face, for he would never forget that voice. Opening the doors, he noticed Loader, who was listening to his comrade's story about how he was attacked by a demonic monkey. The girl sitting next to him added that it was all the captain's fault, and that they definitely wouldn't have managed without him. Another knight chimed in that the monkey was quite funny. The narrator immediately got angry and asked his comrade how his group was doing, and suggested that they go to her. He was sure that his team would give them a beating, and a conflict was brewing between them. The bartender said that recently the evil dragon entered the reproductive stage, so he began stealing cattle and eating people. If they are so tough, then it would be better if they dealt with him instead of causing trouble here, because if the dragon attacks, there will be trouble. Ordinary travelers will definitely not be able to repel the attack, and the city will plunge into chaos. Suddenly, Loader announced that the Holy Swordswoman was already on her way. She was his mentor, so she would definitely help him slay this dragon. This information initially stunned everyone because they were worried that they would not be able to cope on their own. They didn't need troops and they would figure everything out themselves. Hearing this, the others were in shock. With the saint, they will be able to defeat the dragon. If all goes well, Loader will become the hero of the city. So the knight suggested having a drink and celebrating the upcoming deliverance from the dragon, throwing a bag of money on the table along the way. After paying the bartender for the drink, Lin realized that the dragon was his chance to turn the situation in his favor. Noticing the stranger leaving, Loader called out to him, surprised that he would not drink with them. Lin smirked and declined, deciding that he would do it later. A little later, Loader found the saint inside the temple, kneeling and praying. The man reported that an evil dragon was approaching the city and no one dared to go against it. When asked how the mission was progressing, Loader reported that 10 dragon hunters had been stationed at various points throughout the city. And everything was as she asked, but if they did not do well, the girl would lose her reputation. As they went outside, they noticed a crowd of people who wanted to see the Holy Swordswoman and admired her beauty. The girl could not understand what they were doing here at such a special time, after which she ordered everyone to be evacuated. But at that very second, a dragon appeared in the city, which began to grab people and lift them into the air. Noticing him, the swordswoman wanted to direct the dragon to the group, and Loader should take a partner and go to the city wall. Meanwhile, Lin's subordinate announced that the dragon was already here. They checked everything. There were a bunch of soldiers at the gate. Time is running out, but it will all be over soon, and now the survival game must begin. A little while later, the swordswoman and Loader were shocked to see a crowd of dragons flying towards them. The warriors standing on the walls tried to attack the monsters from afar using huge ballistas. The girl immediately asked if the knights knew how to hunt dragons because they would soon have a meal. The warriors immediately began loading ballistas and shooting at fast-moving targets. The other travelers were delighted because nothing less could be expected from a dragon hunter. But suddenly their joy vanished when they noticed something huge approaching them. It was a purple golden mother of dragons who was not afraid of ballistas. Noticing the running warriors, the dragon began to gather a cloud of energy and breathe fire in their direction. The wall was about to collapse, but at that moment, the saint used the highest level of the swordsman and ordered to continue the defense. Watching this from the side, Lin was surprised because he didn't think that she would be able to repel the dragon's attack. And no one could have imagined that the mother of dragons would be so powerful, and her characteristics were beyond belief. Then he noticed the swordswoman's stats. Her name was Alice and she was already level 80. Her strength was no less than that of a dragon, and the boy was glad that he was not her target now. It was likely that the swordswoman would soon run out of steam, and that would be a chance for him to sneak up on her. Until then, Lin could only watch how the duel between the dragon and the saint would end. He will have the opportunity to take revenge on humanity and enter the city, then people will fall into a trap. His goblin subordinates were already fully prepared to attack, and they were all thirsty for blood. Meanwhile, Loader was able to defeat the dragon, albeit with great difficulty, but he knew that nothing was impossible. But just as he was rejoicing over his victory, he heard behind him the cry of a man who was running from the goblins. The knight asked not to joke like that, because the goblins live in the forest and do not dare to come to the city. But as soon as they saw the goblin with their own eyes, they decided to split into groups. Loader went after the goblins with Emilia, unaware that they were being ambushed. Several goblins immediately jumped out of the sewer and threw a net over the girl, and knocked the knight to the ground. Emilia loudly asked for help, but her comrades could do nothing, as they themselves were surrounded by monsters. The knights who were still able to stand on their feet were defeated by Lin, who approached them from behind. As he approached his victims, the boy was surprised that he could catch them so easily. Loder declared that he would finish them off, for which he was immediately kicked in the face, losing consciousness in the process. Lin gave the command to leave the city with these two, and let the rest climb the wall with him. Meanwhile, Alice, who was on the wall, did not understand what was happening, and why the goblins came right now. Suddenly, the mother of dragons appeared before her in human form, declaring that they were too defenseless. After these words, she rushed at the swordswoman, wanting to destroy her with one blow. Alice decided to see how much blood would come out of the dragon using a special sword skill. Alice was sure that he would soon deal with her, but she wondered if Lauder would cope with the remaining dragons and goblins. Suddenly, there was an explosion behind her, and she realized that the knights still hadn't dealt with the goblins. The dragon noticed that the goblins had arrived in time and decided to retreat to heal her wounds and then promised to return. Alice decided to let her go after all, since she was able to get to the dragon's nest herself. Going down, she decided to find Loder and find out if all the goblins had been killed. The remaining knights worriedly stated that Loder and Freya had been taken by goblins. Looking at the bodies of her fallen comrades, the woman realized that these were not the simple monsters they usually fought. These were much stronger than before. Loder didn't even have time to do anything. Frowning, Alice promised to destroy all the goblin tribes in the enchanted forest. But suddenly the girl grabbed her hand and asked her to stop, because if the dragon and the goblins returned, the disaster could happen again. They were just civilians, and they wouldn't be able to recover from another attack. The inhabitants of the temple are much more important than a couple of people, and Loder has only himself to blame for his own weakness, since even the goblins were able to deal with him. The next morning, Lin returned to the tribe, where he was immediately greeted with a smile. The goblins noticed that he had captured 2 people, leading them along like slaves. When they were dropped near the stone, Loder noticed that they were able to capture the elves as well. Exhausted, Freya realized that things were bad, and they wouldn't last long here. Right now, she couldn't recover because I'm too strong and the divine power can't handle it. Lin didn't think that the effect of leaving would come so soon, and the girl's recovery skills were too weak. A frightened Freya couldn't understand how he knew her name and what he was doing, feeling the goblin's touch. Touching her thigh, Lin dug his nails into her, and the girl screamed loudly in pain. Loder asked him to stop, but was immediately hit in the face. But he added that the holy swordswoman would kill Lin in a matter of seconds. However, the guy said that she would also become his prey. It's just that the time has not come yet. One of them has already covered all traces, so no one will find them. He then sent his subordinate and the second generation into the forest to kill as many monsters as possible. Events were starting to pick up speed, so they had to complete their stages of evolution. But for now, he decided to ask Loder questions. He better answer, or he might lose some body part. So the first question was whether they were secretly torturing the goblins. Loder was visibly frightened, which caused him to stutter and be unable to give any concrete answers. He responded too slowly, so Lin swung his blade, cutting off the man's ear. Then he stated that they do everything to protect people. Their duty is to destroy all monsters. Lin doubted that all this was for the sake of humanity, since most likely they only wanted to increase their status and prestige. After all, it's much easier to kill the goblin and all those who disagree than to do something worthwhile. Fear immediately enveloped both Loder and Freya. They could not understand how he knew all this. The guy decided that their dialogue was over, he was different from them, and did everything for the good of evil. So now the vile monster would teach them a lesson. Loder begged the goblin not to touch Freya, but it was too late and the girl could do nothing. The knight tried to break free, but the goblins had him firmly chained and did not allow him to move. Lin decided to give the girl back her words. The lesson had just begun, so she should listen carefully and let Loder appreciate her. He decided to see what the goblins would do to her, at which point the knight's eyes widened in horror. A little later, 2 goblins were deciding whose turn it was to stand guard, remembering that the chief had said not to kill the hostages. However, they were not worried about this, because they were sure that Freya would live for a long time. Loder was also conscious and asked the girl to hold on and not give in to the goblins. The elven queen watched them with her daughter, but did not interfere in any way. The woman concluded that Lin hated these people, but this is understandable because they are much worse than them. He had previously said that he was going to take revenge on humanity, and he took this matter very seriously. The elven queen realized once again that this was the most special goblin she had ever seen. He seemed very strong to her, and Kasana noticed that her mother looked as if she was conquered by him. Meanwhile, the chief was informed that the second-generation goblins had returned. According to calculations, they returned too early, but everyone was safe and carried a lot of loot. One of them, worthy of being a second-generation goblin, quickly reached level 30, and his stats were almost comparable to his. Lin decided to find out why they returned so early and learned that they had killed all the monsters nearby, so they headed west. However, there they met several large goblins who slaughtered the smaller ones. They were from the bloodtooth tribe, where almost everyone is quite large. When they were looking for monsters earlier, they discovered that several tribes had agreed to attack, leaving traces of blood and teeth. If they catch their leaders and create a third generation of stronger goblins, they will have a better chance of resisting the humans. Loder suddenly declared that no matter how powerful the goblins were, they were all just bugs. Turning around, Lin realized that he had almost forgotten about him, so he decided to give the man to the other goblins. The subordinates were delighted by this and immediately attacked the knight, who was scared to death. To goblins, humans were beautiful creatures, their skin thin and delicate, but Loder didn't like that statement. Freya couldn't even look at her comrade as the goblins tore at his body. A few hours later, the goblins began asking if they were going to attack another goblin tribe. If they do this, they will become stronger, so they will not only attack them, but also capture their leader. In that case, he finally decided on a name, and they will be called the Tianmao tribe. His subordinates immediately picked up this name and began shouting it loudly. Yue began to worry because those goblins were bigger, and there might be problems. But Lin had already thought of everything. He had something for them, and after these words, he turned his gaze to the tied-up Freya. The next day, going to the magical forest, the guy decided to see the strength of the enemy. There was a beautiful view from here, but besides that, there were many different types of goblins here. Lin didn't understand why many were so scared. Then he noticed their leader, Chieftain Bloodtooth. This was a level 50 combat goblin, and an elite one at that, which made him a serious opponent. With a total combat effectiveness of 900 units, they won't be able to deal with a dozen goblin fighters, but catching them alive is not so easy. Depending on their size, each one has a different resistance to poisons. You need to find good poisons for everything to work. The forbidden technique that Freya once used on him is actually quite good and could come in handy. Returning to the camp, the goblin brought the head everything he had asked for, adding that Freya was almost dead. At this time, the girl was lying on the ground and asking to be killed so that she could atone for her sins before God. Suddenly, she felt something pleasant, but when she noticed Lin approaching her, she immediately screamed in fear. She started to freak out and get nervous, but the guy immediately calmed her down by slapping her. He then abruptly hugged her and held her close, declaring that her punishment was over. He keeps his word, and all that remains for her to do is prove her loyalty, but she did not understand how she could do this. She can choose to believe in God, or she can become his believer, wander after him and become his pet. Realizing she had no other choice, Freya licked his finger, making what the guy said was the right choice. From now on, Lin was her only owner, so he would call her a little dog. Then he picked her up in his arms and carried her to a small well where there was hot water. Having undressed and plunged into the well, the girl immediately felt a pleasant warmth and began to thank the owner for his kindness. Freya was willing to give anything, and Lin wanted to see her use the saint's skill in the cage. At first, the girl did not understand what was being discussed, after which she began to read a spell from the Book of Magic from the elf lair. When the spell was finished, a golden cage appeared in front of them that could hold almost anything. Noticing that Freya had healed, Loder asked her to quickly kill the goblin and then heal him. Lin just chuckled and explained that she was now with him, although the knight did not understand how the saint could submit to a goblin. The guy asked the girl if this was her desire. She fell to her knees and explained that she had chosen this path herself. Then Loder realized that the goblin was able to break even the saint, but he was sure that very soon the goblin race would disappear from the face of the earth. The purpose of their existence is to be at the mercy of people, and the Church of the Holy Order will kill them all. Lin thanked him for the information and decided to reward the knight, asking his subordinate not to let him relax. The goblin asked not to worry, promising to take good care of him, which scared Loder. Now that the deed was done, Lin asked Freya to follow him. It was time to destroy the Bloodtooth tribe. At the same time, in the Bloodtooth tribe, one of the goblins announced to the leader that everyone was ready. The leader immediately swung his club and announced that it was time to destroy the southern tribe and take their elves. Suddenly, another huge warrior stopped the chief, saying that some goblin wanted to talk to him. Approaching them, Lin stated that he knew that the head of the tribe had a mindset close to that of a human, so he decided to talk to them personally. The leader decided that he was a mutant, but the guy was just a little smarter than the usual goblins. He introduced himself as the head of another tribe and announced that he was going to remove their chief. The rest were given two options. They would obey me or die here. And everyone immediately guessed that this was the goblin who was holding the elves in captivity, and Lin noticed that the leader had good genes, so he offered to go with him. But the leader didn't like this proposal, and he grabbed the guy by the head, not expecting that he would decide to come himself. After he finished Lin, the elves would belong to him, and the rest would support their leader. Lin knew that talking would lead to nothing, so if he didn't want to live, then there was no point in talking. With a sharp movement, Lin cut off the leader's hand with his blade, causing him to fall and writhe in pain. The rest of the goblins decided to kill the guy and avenge the leader, but the guest was not against this turn of events. At that very moment, Lin's subordinates arrived to help, destroying the remaining goblins. From the very beginning, they did not listen to the leader's order, waiting for the permission of the bloody tooth. The enemy leader did not expect to see so many goblin warriors who were significantly stronger. The guy's plan went like clockwork. Now he can relax. There's no need to worry about anything. However, the leader was not going to retreat, and even if he died, he decided to take the guy with him. Without thinking twice, Lin called Freya to him, who immediately used the holy cage, imprisoning the leader. It was a terrible technique for the goblin, as he could hardly bear the light. Lin began to praise the girl, promising that she would soon become even stronger and he would reward her. The fallen chieftain was chained up while the boy spoke of how he would soon become a hero of his kind. Returning to their tribe, they had to put in a lot of effort to subdue the enemy leader. However, they have dealt with this problem, and now no one poses a threat to them. Watching him from the side, Loder could not imagine how much power this goblin had, and who he was at all. The leader turned to Yue and offered to take care of the fertilization while she took care of everything here. The guy also decided to leave Freya with her, asking her to obey, but the girl was a little scared. He then asked Leah to help him with his clothes later, as they had to meet a friend now. Judging from Loder's face, reinforcements should arrive in Guangming soon. With his current strength, he can fight the knights, but not the saint. It will take time to raise the goblin hero, so he needs to find an assistant to help him contain the holy swordswoman. And now it's time to meet the dragon, who is at least hundreds of miles away. The most convenient way to get to the island is to attract the dragon with several animal carcasses. Very soon, the blood should attract her, and a little while later, the dragon already smelled the prey. In the end, the smell was too much to bear, and Lin decided to hide inside one of the carcasses. Having grabbed its prey, the dragon took to the air again, heading back to the island. Finding himself in the nest, Lin climbed out. Realizing that the dragon did not live alone, all that was left was to find the dragoness. Suddenly, a face appeared behind him, declaring that there was some strange thing in the food. The dragon also recognized him. He was the goblin who led his army into the city, but it was unclear why he came to her lair. At first she wanted to eat him since he himself showed up in their lair, but the guy hastened to stop her. Lin wanted to discuss cooperation, which surprised the dragon, although he helped her once, so she was ready to listen. She then appeared before him in human form, explaining that if he convinced her, he would not be eaten. She also wants to take revenge on the holy swordswoman, so the goblin suggested that they join forces, and the goblin army would distract the enemy. The dragon didn't understand how low-level monsters dared to talk about resisting the swordswoman. However, the guy clearly interested her, and she asked him to tell her what exactly he wanted to do. It was simple. He wanted her to send her soldiers to attack the city from time to time. The dragon became interested in what he could do, a bunch of goblins against people, and what he specifically would do. She suggested that he not fight such a powerful man face to face. They need to attack the weak points to defeat the enemy. Suddenly the dragoness laughed, but still the goblin's weapons would not harm her soldiers, so there was no danger. Lin lost a little confidence, but still offered to make a deal. The girl agreed because she didn't think that some goblin could be so smart. The more she looks at him, the more she likes him, so she suggests that he give her a reward. The guy was genuinely surprised, realizing that the female dragon was also ready to reproduce. In that case, it was time to reward her, and the dragoness playfully thought about what to choose. Meanwhile, in the Tianmao tribe, Loder couldn't understand why the knights hadn't come to help yet. If he stayed here any longer, he would break down. He needed to run, but there were goblins everywhere. Then he began to think of a plan in his head, but froze in horror when he looked at the sky in front of him. He saw a huge dragon flying towards them and began to ask them to let him go, because he did not want to burn alive here with them. The goblins immediately prepared to defend themselves, while Leah and her daughter did not understand where the dragon came from. But when the monster landed on the ground, they all noticed that their leader was on its back, announcing that he had returned. Everyone was happy to see the leader back, while Loder doubted that this guy was definitely one of the goblins. At this time, royal knights clad in steel armor and riding horses appeared in Guangmi Square. As they approached the temple, they dismounted and immediately fell to their knees before the holy swordswoman, who ordered them to develop a rescue plan as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Lin began to consider a new plot for the development of the third generation of goblins, and in one of the options, the swordswoman should not attack them. He decided not to take any risks, speeding up time to get to the end of the month, where each of them would be stronger. When the acceleration activation began, the system announced that he had not managed to gain enough experience. As a reward, he received 20 life points, and he would also be transported to the end of the month right now. In shock, Lin's eyes widened, and for the first time he felt what it was like to jump in time, which was quite strange. The system congratulated him on reaching level 50, showing improved stats, but his overall strength had not increased much. At that very moment, Yue ran into his house, declaring that goblins were born dead. When he went outside, he found the elven women kneeling in front of the small bodies of the goblins. He didn't understand what the mistake was, but the third generation was significantly weaker. Suddenly, Loder shouted that the goblins were brainless because they still wanted to raise strong offspring. Lin decided that the man knew what the problem was. The higher the level of the goblins, the harder it was to bear their children. It is unlikely that they will be able to conquer the world if they reproduce a lot, because they will not be able to bear strong offspring. Realizing the situation, Lin decided to thank the man, but he broke the news too late. So he ordered the goblin to have fun with him, but not to play with him to death. The subordinate immediately accepted the order, and Loder declared that even as a ghost, he would not leave Lin alone. It's too late to save the dead. They need to think things through carefully. Otherwise, they won't be able to resist the enemies. While the boy was trying to figure out how to settle the goblins, a dragon landed behind him with a crash. Noticing the strange behavior of the monsters, Lin realized that contact with the dragon might be the only chance. At that very moment, she appeared before him in human form, thereby giving the go-ahead, and the system congratulated him on his elevation. A little later, Lin was surprised that the dragon seemed so insatiable. If the other dragons were the same, then he was a real hero. She could have simply given him her blood, but she chose another method. It seems that soon she will find him here too. But the guy explained that they needed to finish their business first and asked her to give him her blood and then return to him. As evening approached, the goblins lit a huge fire, rejoicing that thanks to the dragon's blood they had increased their strength. Lin didn't expect anything else from the legendary dragon. Not only he, but also the other goblins became more powerful. But the points are still too low, so he needs to prepare, which is why Lin opened a system shop. The leader of the tribe could not remain idle, so he decided to learn new powers and choose a new weapon. He had 180 points, which should be enough for some modern and practical equipment. Then he noticed the hand crossbow of elements. It is small in size, suitable for long-range attacks, and can absorb elements. He also chose the blade resistance skill, although there are cheaper abilities, but only with both can you resist the Holy Swordswoman and save her life. Lin doesn't know how to use this advanced weapon, but wants to find someone to try it out for themselves. He then turned his attention to Loder, deciding that he was the perfect fit, thereby frightening the man. Meanwhile, in the magical forest, a group of warriors loudly called for help to lure out the enemies, although they are not interested in low-ranking monsters. The Dragon Mother often disturbs the city, and the saint has no intention of taking care of the goblins, so she leaves this opportunity to them. They can thank Loder for making this wonderful opportunity possible. Suddenly, the sorceress got into a fighting stance, telling the captain that something was moving there. Raising their heads, they noticed a huge spider that began to descend from the tree, and the sorceress began to shake with fear. The archer easily pierced the monster, realizing that they were just third-rank bugs and there was nothing scary about them. However, the warrior felt that something was wrong here and decided not to relax, and at that very second, they noticed the goblin hero in front of them. He looked like a leader, and it was hard to think that their expedition would end so quickly. However, this only made the heroes happy because now all the credit would belong to them. Without thinking twice, the leader decided to proceed with the plan and asked the archer to cover him. The knight stated that he could be relied upon too. He had also killed enough goblins and even a heroic one once. In this case, you need to finish with them as quickly as possible in order to continue on your way. Without thinking twice, the knight moved forward and used the mid-rank warrior skill, Storm Spear. To everyone's surprise, the goblin grabbed the spear in midair, stunning the group of heroes. He then threw the spear back. The sorceress created a protective barrier which immediately cracked. In any case, their bodies are protected, which is already good, so there shouldn't be any difficulties. Suddenly, she felt someone pierce her stomach, and behind her stood a goblin killer. The rest realized that they were trapped and needed to defend themselves and quickly check the area. Then they noticed that they were surrounded by huge goblins, and within moments they were all defeated. These are all trophies of the tribe. The leader said to bring people to him, so it's better not to touch anyone. Another goblin began to complain, since he was the one who killed most of them, and suggested that they have a battle. The third decided to stop them, explaining that they were the strongest goblins and the tribe would belong to them. The others also began to support their brother, agreeing to walk side by side with him. When the goblin heroes returned to the tribe, Leah asked the leader if he could definitely control them. One of the goblins declared that these were their trophies and decided to eat the man, but Lin had not yet said everything, so he asked to let him go. But if he wants to tell him something, he must give in exchange one of the girls standing behind him. Yue and Leah were scared while the leader frowned, reminding him who was the leader here. However, the mad goblin declared that he was much stronger than him and offered to test it. The guy realized who their support was, so he gave him a chance to kill the real goblin next to him. Then they are gone altogether. However, the mad goblin declared that he was beyond his capabilities and would become the new leader, and the previous leader would be killed. But suddenly his brother grabbed him tightly by the head, not allowing him to move. After killing his comrade, the warrior declared that he had realized a lot since his ascension. He differs from others in his devotion to the head, but believes in his absolute power. Previously, the father defeated the previous leader, and now he also wants to try to do the same. Lin noticed that this goblin's strength had already exceeded 1,200, which was an impressive increase. The boy then released his energy, asking if he was sure he could stand up to him. The remaining goblins began to incite the warrior to kill the former leader and take the women. Apparently, many have been bought and want to follow him, but first he needs to prove his strength and power. If the goblin heroes want to continue following the leader, they must stand next to him, otherwise they are finished. The hero did not expect that the leader would sacrifice someone. It was surprising that the leader would be such an inconspicuous guy. However, luck was on his side. As soon as they started fighting, he would immediately run away. Their difference in strength was too big, so it was useless to act otherwise. Lin noticed that he was a little more popular, and only a few goblins were willing to investigate the warrior. However, he declared that he was different from them, chose infinite power, and then rushed into the attack. The traveler could not understand when this guy managed to become so strong, although the other one was not far behind him. Lin noticed his son's good abilities, after which he offered to try a shot from a crossbow. Having managed to break through the fireball, the goblin continued to attack, swinging his sword. When the explosion occurred, the other observers immediately flinched, fearing for the leader. But when the smoke cleared, the goblin was stunned when Lin stopped his blade with his bare hand. He was able to surprise the leader, but he was unlucky with his opponent, as he had the Blade Slayer skill. After several more attempts, the warrior finally decided to admit his defeat, bowing before the leader. Lin didn't think that this goblin would be so spineless, although he tried to prove otherwise. The other goblins, who were on the warrior's side, asked him not to kill them and to have mercy. Freya healed the wounded warrior, and Lin stated that if he continued to follow him, he would not kill. However, he cannot let the rest of the boys go, and they will have to serve him forever. The warriors immediately accepted the spirit and declared that they would be with him forever, and he asked the other guys to provide him with it. Once the traitors were dealt with, the leader gave the order to absorb these disobedient ones to become stronger. At this time, the traveler told Loder that this was not just a goblin, but a real monster that should be avoided by the entire empire. Lin approached them and apologized for not putting on a show for them, although Loder was eagerly waiting for someone to come and rescue him. However, he hoped too much, but the man was ready to wait for the swordswoman because they would all die when she came. The man's mad grin returned as he began to insult the goblin. The traveler asked the leader not to be too proud because as soon as the holy swordswoman dealt with the dragon, she would immediately come here with an entire army. Lin just laughed, since it was unlikely that the dragon would go to attack the city alone. In any case, he was glad to hear his thoughts now the guy was completely calm about the dragon. The traveler realized that they had deliberately brought so many soldiers from the city here to mock him. But soldiers can be killed, not played with, but he has already learned the necessary information and it is time to finish. Meanwhile, in the city, a knight burst into the swordswoman's chambers and she thought that the dragon had broken through or the team had returned. The man hesitated at first, but the woman ordered him to speak directly and to the point. He then reported that the Knights of the Silver Blade were destroyed, and only one returned, which the swordswoman could not believe. After some time, she found a knight with very serious wounds, and healing did not help him. When asked where such injuries came from and what about the others, the knight replied that they had come across the hero's goblin and then fled. The church attendant was frightened and suggested that they be careful, although they were already having a hard time. The knight lost consciousness, while the others realized that the goblins were to blame for everything again. They didn't know what kind of species this was and what kind of goblin heroes they were, which no one had ever seen before. The dragons are attacking more and more often. The goblins can take advantage of this to strike suddenly, and the swordswoman alone will not stand. So they should send a few people as support, they should protect the city, and she should personally deal with the goblins and the mother of dragons. The rest of the group began to worry about the previous team and wonder if they were alive. Suddenly Kasimov came in and asked them not to send anyone. The soldiers were too arrogant, so their regiment was defeated. He asked to leave the rescue of people to him, although the girl doubted that he could cope alone. He once fought against 4 Titan warriors at once on his own and survived. Even these goblin heroes were no match for him now, and to prove his words he took off his hat and opened his face, revealing a huge scar. At this time, Lin opened the system to look at a new plot where Kasimov was supposed to attack the tribe late at night alone. It was too naive to come here alone, but in the end he was able to cause serious damage. The guy decided to take the initiative and get rid of him personally, thus choosing the third option. This guy is very strong, and he should prepare before the battle because the system warned him about it. The next day, Loder joyfully shouted that Kasimov was already on his way, and that soon it would be the end of them all. The man knew that this man had fought even with the Titans and had stood against them. Titan is a powerful warrior raised by an enemy country with Titan genes, capable of destroying rank 5 monsters. This suggests that Kasimov has some special techniques, but Loder suggested that he start begging for mercy. Lin decided to play it safe once again and send someone to do reconnaissance. Towards evening, Kasimov was riding a horse, noticing that there was not a single monster in the forest, which was very strange. Only the remains of the previous squad, which he considered trash, who could not cope with a simple task. He was wondering if his current rivals could make him happy when he suddenly heard cries for help nearby. The man immediately sent his horse into a gallop, and when he arrived he noticed a girl sitting on his knees. When she turned around, he was shocked to recognize her as Ifreya, who had asked him for help. Kasimov could not believe that she was alive, and decided to find out what happened to Loder. As it turned out, she escaped from the goblin tribe, and Loder died. The man suspiciously asked her to remind him which tribe she had escaped from. It was not far from here, and the goblins there were very scary. Kasimov ran in that direction while Ifreya asked him to take her, but he refused, ordering her to go ahead. When alone and helpless, Kasimov can gain a 30% bonus to his stats and another 20% for each enemy he kills. Loder was finished and now no one could stop him. If he came first, the tribe would not be able to stand against him. But suddenly at full speed he noticed a tripwire underneath him, which caused his horse to fall, and he himself managed to group himself. At that very moment, Ifreya approached him, not intending to leave, and created an explosion of divine light. The wounded Kasimov did not understand what she was doing, and as it turned out, the owner ordered to kill him, but the girl again attacked him with divine light. Suddenly, a purple mist appeared in front of her, and the man grabbed her by the hair using soul absorption. Since she herself approached him, she should know that he doesn't just like killing monsters. It was a great chance for him, but suddenly he heard a voice nearby asking if he had decided to go against them alone. Lin stood behind him, noticing his good skills and weapons, which noticeably surprised the man. Read her skills, the guy noticed that if he used his attacks, his tribe would have a hard time. The dumbfounded Kasimov could not understand how this low-ranking goblin dared to take his blade into his hands. Then he realized that this guy had forced Ifreya to attack him. She had caved into the goblins for the sake of survival. Lin confirmed his assumption, adding that she turned out to be a good animal. However, Kasimov disappointed him, because the guy thought that he would be stronger, but in the end he just wanted to have fun with the girls. The man didn't know where he got the information about his characteristics, but it was common for him to deal with goblins like him. He promised to tear Lin apart with his bare hands, because a place in hell was already waiting for him. He wanted to rush into the attack, but stopped abruptly when he noticed a crowd of goblins in front of him and a dragon behind them. Lin decided to check which of them would go to hell, after which the dragon began to spew flames towards the man. A little later, the head and his team returned to the tribe, where he was met by the rest of the goblins. Loder noticed the charred body of Kasimov, who was unable to stand up to the goblin. Suddenly, the man called the holy swordswoman worthless because she sends warriors one by one to certain death. Lin decided to focus on cultivating rare species of goblins. The meat from corpses is very useful, so it will be useful for development. Then he gave the command to a certain group to eat first and leave the leftovers to the rest. To turn a common goblin into a rare species, certain genes and talent are needed. He decided to select the fierce goblins that have the greatest potential. This species is very hypocritical and spoiled, but that's just what's needed. As for the swordswoman, he had already checked the information. She only had 3 knights that had already fallen into his hands. As soon as news of Kasimov's death reaches us, the authority of the holy swordswoman will be undermined, and she will definitely do something. She will need to raise her reputation, and Lin will need to use the system to find out the future. After watching several developments, Lin realized how greedy the holy swordswoman was, and victory would be his. Then he announced a general meeting to the rest of the goblins, saying that tomorrow he would take them on a grand task. His eyes were shining with confidence, for the time had come for the destruction he had planned in advance. The next day, the Holy Swordswoman was brought human remains that were found outside the city. This happened in just one day, and it is unclear how they could kill Kazimov and still return the body. The woman began to reason that the attacks of the goblins and the dragon were not a simple coincidence. Perhaps these two races conspired to lock them in the city so that they could not do anything else. There was no longer any room for inaction, so she gave the order for all groups to immediately go and seek support. Having set out on the errand, one of the warriors noted that the journey would take at least 4 days, during which time the city could be in danger. Then he offered his help. He has very fast legs, and for now they can go back and guard the city. But they explained to him that this was a special strategy of the saint. If they encountered goblins during their journey, then at least there was a chance that someone would return and report everything. The problem is that now the knights can't deal with the goblins and the dragon, and the saint is confused and doesn't know what to do. That's why the saint developed this strategy. She wants to protect at least them, and they definitely need to find reinforcements. Upon reaching the bridge, the group stopped, noticing that the suspension bridge had collapsed. The sorceress assumed that this was a trap, and that they needed to change direction immediately. Although an ambush may await them on another route, although the bridge is broken, this is their safest route. The leader then gave the order to cut down the trees in order to build a new bridge before dark. As dusk began to fall, they succeeded and had to hurry to cross the bridge. They were walking carefully on horseback when they suddenly noticed that it had suddenly become dark. Raising their heads, they noticed with horror a dragon, and on its back stood a goblin. Lin noticed that they were jacks of all trades, and instead of making a detour, they decided to build a new bridge, fearing that he would ambush them. The leader of the travelers realized that this guy had deliberately broken the bridge while waiting for them here. At that very moment, the dragon began to breathe fire, burning the bridge, but the group still managed to reach the ground. The bridge they had just completed was burned again, and the man wanted to torture the goblin to death. Lin doubted that it would work, since their goblins and the mother of dragons were not that easy to defeat, and they were coming any minute. A couple of minutes later, the group was already surrounded by goblins, and dragons began flying through the air. If a man jumps off a dragon, they are sure to die, but they must endure. And if they do, the city will prosper again. The captain gave the order to the fastest of them to run and tell the others the news while they held off the goblins. Without wasting any time, the man put his shield in front of him and rushed into the thick of the enemy to break through. Looking at the goblins, the sorceress noticed that something was wrong, and the enemies were behaving strangely. They deliberately allowed their comrade to escape and run away. It was quite possible that this was part of their clan. Then they looked up again and noticed a dragon hanging in the air with another goblin standing on its back. Lin informed them that their plan was to get the saint out of the city, and they had to guess what would happen once she left the city. Then the captain gave the order to seize the rider because the city must not suffer. It and the saint must be protected. After this, the knight began to fight with a huge goblin, who was not inferior to him in strength. Suddenly, the man noticed Kasimov's blade in his hands, and Lin declared to his men that time was running out. Jumping off the dragon, the guy gave the order to deal with the knights before the saint arrived. It didn't take long, and their captain was pinned to the ground by wind suppression. Lin asked his relative to leave them for a while and go away before the saint arrived. The next morning, the swordswoman had already arrived at the scene with her detachment, noticing with horror the gnawed bodies of her comrades. Bat, who had left their party to deliver the news, was sobbing loudly and shouting that he would avenge them. It turns out that the ruined dragons are now working together, and Bat saw a goblin riding a dragon. Perhaps this is their leader. It was he who ordered the dragon to destroy the bridge. The crew's bodies must have been burned too. The dragon flame only affected a small area, and the goblins ate the main skin off the people. There were too many misfortunes. Suddenly, the girl realized that it was a diversionary tactic, and they had to go back because the city was under attack right now. However, upon arrival, they realized that they were too late, as there was destruction and lifeless bodies everywhere. The swordswoman noticed the boy crying over his father's body and asked him not to be afraid, but he only pushed her hand away. He asked her to get out because she only pretends to protect them every day, but it was because of her that the goblins came. The rest of the survivors supported the boy because the girl could not protect them, and the city did not need such a protector. The swordswoman was surrounded by people who insulted her and asked her to get out of the city. The dragon who was watching her realized that Lin had done his job, and there had even been no direct confrontation. They caught them off guard, and now humanity will have a hard time. She was lucky that she met Lin one day. Closer to night, Lin returned to the tribe, which was loudly announced by one of the goblins. The guy decided to find out if anything strange was happening here, but the attack on the city went smoothly, and there was even a catch. He pointed to the two girls in the cage and explained that they had been spared so that they could be played with later. And Kelia, whom they met there, was given a whole cart of gold and taken out of the city, as the owner had requested. The guy praised the goblin because Kelia was the only one who believed in him until the end, and as a reward, he sent her out of this hell. But now he was thinking about how hard it was for the saint because people had to turn away from her. A little later, he reached the dragon's lair to thank the mother of dragons for her help. Even though the saint was out of action, the guy would like to ask to continue sending dragons into the city to put more pressure on the saint. The girl became interested in what she would get in return, because the dragons fly there every day, which makes them very tired. Lin was thinking about this question when suddenly the dragon kissed him and said that she would like him as a reward. At first, the guy assumed it was a joke, but the dragon continued to ask him to make her a child. If he refused, the girl would be angry, and the guy did not understand how a weak goblin could be worthy of her majesty. The girl decided to convince him, explaining that he was not weak, and she saw in him the potential to be a winner. Dragons have always worshipped the strong, so she wants to be around the strong to produce powerful offspring. After some time, Lin was promoted again, for which the system rewarded him with good characteristics. Standing next to the dragon, he decided to let her rest and tried not to wake her. The mother of dragons is a very powerful being. He will have problems if she wants him to stay with her. And the girl thought that Lin was exactly as she imagined him. Perhaps one day the goblins would enter a completely new level. Meanwhile, back at the tribe, Kasana couldn't believe that Lin wanted them to leave. Considering the addition to the tribe, he was allowing them to leave. Elves are more useful than humans, and instead of suppressing them, it is better to risk them voluntarily following him. Then the elf queen offered her daughter and the other elves to leave if they wanted to. However, she herself made a different decision and was ready to voluntarily stay here. After so much time spent together, she was convinced that he was not an easy goblin, which is why she wanted to follow him. Lin noticed that this woman was smart. If she stayed, they would no longer attack other elves. She wants him to become a patron for the elves, so she decided to stay close, but Kasana did not like this. Sitting down on her mother's knee, she also decided not to go anywhere, and would live with her mother and the head. Since it was their choice, then from now on they were not prisoners, but his loyal subordinates. Lin would make sure that they were safe. The Holy Swordswoman has fallen and there will be no more invasions, so you can develop in peace, putting all your efforts into creating an even larger army of heroes. One of the goblins said that these people were too small for him, and the elf queen offered to help with artificial breeding. At that very moment, another subordinate ran up to him and declared that one of the goblins was dead, which stunned the chief. It's unclear how this happened. Literally just a moment ago everything was fine, and then he went crazy and died. But at that very second the goblin came to life, and his body began to transform. In front of him was a level 50 mutated goblin with incredible characteristics. If it weren't for the mother of dragons, perhaps no goblin would have been able to obtain such characteristics. His village wisdom has grown, so he can focus on raising the next generation. 3 months later, at a hotel in the city, the travelers noticed that quite a lot of time had passed, and they became interested in how things were going with the saint. One of the men was sure that he would go crazy if he were in her place. As a friend, some man said that the goblins were able to deal with even their best warriors. Turning their heads, the people noticed the diamond of the commander of the replacement detachment, Siddle. After a 3-month period of stable reproduction, Lin had obtained a total of 150 hero goblins across 3 generations. At this time, the royal family has allocated a reward of 300 gold coins. She gathers a group of brave men to go to the city and then exterminate their tribe. This time he will have to fight with diamond and epic opponents. The system has allocated 1 month for preparation. A diamond rank traveler is considered a mentor to other epic rank travelers and is generally stronger than a holy swordswoman. Leaning back in his chair, the guy tried to figure out what to do and how to deal with them this time. At that very moment, Yue and the elf queen approached him to report something to him. A new generation of goblins has grown up, but there aren't many resources left in the forest. There aren't enough for everyone. There is an iron ore base nearby. This week some goblins lacked weapons and equipment, so their training is delayed. And here there are few resources, and the situation in the city is heating up. So it's time for them to move to a new house which should be well protected. Sometime later they found a huge cave which had a suitable interior. You couldn't imagine a better lair. The war goblins and green goblins must take a few men to clear away the gravel and fortify the cave so that the children can grow up in safety. From this day on, this place will become their new home, and now they can celebrate this matter when they finish the job. However, they all must remember that they must obey the leader in everything, otherwise they will die, and the rest only supported him. Lin has successfully resettled the tribe. It's time to check the city to prepare a perfect plan. If the system is right about travelers, then you need to see everything for yourself before making further plans. Meanwhile, in the city, the bartender was surprised that Sithel not only killed high-level monsters, but decided to go after the goblins. In fact, he wanted to save the useless brother Loder, and at the same time deal with the goblins personally. But suddenly some man said that he just wanted to get the reward, that's all. It was the wizard Gru, who had heard that goblins were worth 1,000 gold pieces. So he wanted to take part too. Siddle noticed that this old man was not keeping his mouth shut very well since he was saying something like that. As a friend, another man laughed when he noticed that the holy swordswoman had failed, so they decided to try it themselves. But they must not forget that this time, cold-blooded Lucelina is also taking part. The other visitors couldn't understand when he came and said that he would do anything for money, and that he didn't care who he killed. Turning to the wandering brave man, Sittle decided that he too had come because of the goblins. But in fact, he had come to get rid of the dragon. If he can kill him, he will become an epic adventurer, which will increase his reputation. He also wanted to remind everyone not to underestimate goblins. Although they are inferior creatures, their evolutionary abilities are amazing. Gru had lived for 100 years and had seen more goblins than all the women present. This inferior race has always represented a great danger to all ethnic peoples. They cannot be exterminated for more than 1,000 years. It's true, many of their comrades died because of the goblins, so you have to be very careful. Siddle decided that together they would definitely cope with them. After the victory, he was even ready to give all the awards to the old man. The man liked this arrangement, since His Highness so desired he would definitely not refuse. A little later, they decided to develop a plan, leading a team of people straight into the forest, solving everything with violence. There is too much unknown on this path. You need to first walk through the area and then make a specific plan. The old man noticed that the boy was being too cautious, so he offered to put everything together for him. Suddenly they noticed a lone knight passing by them, and immediately recognized him. It was the Goblin Slayer, and since he was here too, they might as well try their luck and have a chat with him. Sithel immediately apologized for his rudeness, called the knight a madman, and he simply did not want people to know about his identity. This is a man who has never suffered any serious injuries while fighting goblins, and is said to have killed over 1,000 goblins single-handedly. Then Sittle politely invited him to join them, and attack together. However, the knight was not interested in this, which he said directly, and then asked to clear the way. Gru was displeased with his insolence, asking him not to ask for help when the goblin grabbed him. No matter how strong he is, he can't communicate with people like that because you never know what could happen. While in the city, Lin used his piercing vision to learn more about the Goblin Slayer. He was stunned that one warrior had from 1,000 to 3,000 characteristics at once, and decided to ask the system for some solutions. The system made it clear to him that there were no paths yet, when suddenly he discovered a small group of knights at the gate. There was Scythel, a rider with the ability to restrain. His total combat strength was 1,300. Among them was Gru, a professional great magician with a wide range of skills and a total strength of 1,400 units. Despite their diamond rank, there shouldn't be any problems, but don't relax. The most important thing is to pay special attention to the Goblin Slayer, who poses a much greater threat. Arriving at the tribe's former settlement, the group discovered many traces of the battle left behind earlier. This was enough to prove that the tribe was nearby, when suddenly Sittle called the old man to him. The boy handed him a clump of hair, and the man said that it was the hair of an elf, not ruling out that it helped the goblins escape. They searched the forest and had nowhere to hide. Most likely it was the elves who helped the goblins escape. At that very moment, the wizard took out a butterfly from the jar, which loves the smell of elves. Perhaps they will find the goblins with its help. She started moving in a certain direction, and the others realized that the goblins had crossed the river. Sittle suggested that the old man simply wait for the Goblin Slayer to finish the job, but there was no need for that. Gru pointed to a huge rock behind which the goblin was hiding, but for some reason he remained there. Watching as several knights rushed after him, Lin, who was watching them, was glad that they took the bait. When he suddenly noticed a goblin killer on the shore, the guy wanted to deal with him first, but did not know when he would decide to come. But as soon as the knight took off his armor, Lin was shocked to discover that the Goblin Slayer was a girl. But she doesn't look like a representative of the human race, and her strength also stands out. Studying her carefully, the guy tried to understand who was swimming in such a dangerous situation. It feels like she's doing it on purpose, trying to seduce, and it's possible that she's discovered them. Having saddled the dragon, Lin decided to retreat because he needed to be careful with her, and for now he could deal with the others. Noticing the dragon, the Goblin Slayer decided that it was very wise of her. Meanwhile, the group of travelers stopped in front of the fallen goblin, suspecting that they might be surrounded. Suddenly, arrows started flying at them from different sides. Gru reacted instantly, creating a shield around everyone. For now, the group remained safe, but the old man concluded that this was not the end. At that very second, a huge goblin with a spear in his hands began running towards them from behind the bushes. This is the hero's type, so Gru gave a clear order to attack him with a combined effort. The wizard attacked him with a fire spell and protected his comrades with a dome. But despite their efforts, the goblin not only didn't die, but also became even more angry. Sithel was horrified to find that they were surrounded and the goblins were already everywhere. Gru couldn't figure out where they got their equipment from, so he decided to rely on Sithel. But then the wizard used the source of power to restore the strength of his comrades. At that very moment, the others began to use magic of various elements to deal with the goblins. While on the top of the mountain and watching what was happening, Lin asked another goblin to help them. Having landed on the ground, he rushed towards the travelers at incredible speed. This goblin managed to scratch the wizard, and the rest, noticing their fellow, immediately perked up. The travelers were forced to hold on, but the goblins began to overwhelm them with their strength. Then Sithel turned to the priesthood, using the maximum of his power to eradicate evil souls. The guy wanted to use the snowstorm, but for now, he needed to surround all the wounded and restore their strength. The diamond-rank travelers were smarter than Lin thought. If they came to the other goblin tribes, they wouldn't be able to withstand it. But unfortunately, they came to them, and now they will be forced to face a mutated species of goblins. At this time, the goblin slayer stood on the shore, thinking that goblins were very beautiful and strong. At this time, Lin's army crushed the group of travelers to pieces, leaving them no chance. Sithel looked in shock at the wizard, who was on the verge of death, and asked the guy to help him. He was terrified to death and decided to run away, realizing that these goblins were real demons. Sithel left the old man to die and tried to escape, dodging arrows along the way. He didn't expect that they would also shoot elven arrows, when suddenly a goblin slayer appeared in front of him. The frightened boy asked him for help, while 3 goblins attacked him from behind. It cost the knight nothing to deal with his opponents in a matter of seconds, and Sithel began to thank him, promising to repay him. But suddenly the goblin slayer turned her head and menacingly asked them to stay as far away from her as possible. The guy asked her not to leave because this is an unusual tribe of goblins, and their ruler is somewhere here. At this time, the huge goblin lifted Gru by the head, trying to decide what to do with him next. Suddenly, a blade flew into his back, causing him to fall to the ground along with the old man. Watching from the sidelines, Lin tried to understand what was going on. Suddenly, a knight began to approach the group of goblins, noticing the mutated goblin and assuming that he was their leader. The monsters did not want to engage in dialogue, but instead decided to attack all together to kill the intruder. The goblin slayer easily dealt with all the attackers without making any unnecessary movements. Lin didn't understand what kind of skills she had. Since her rank was rated as A, perhaps she also had magic. At that moment, the mutated goblin entered a ferocious state, strengthening his body. However, even after this, he was no match for the knight, who cut off all the thorns on his body with his sword. And just as she wanted to finish him off, her whole body was bound by some kind of viscous liquid. Lin didn't want to back down, because it was a shame to just leave her. She had good skills and would be great for further breeding. They clearly wouldn't be able to withstand a direct confrontation, so they would work to exhaustion, which is why the guy ordered everyone to retreat and form a circle. Noticing Lin, the goblin slayer was surprised that he was controlling a dragon, but she was sure that she could not lose here. They decided to attack her from afar and threw several huge boulders from the cliff, which the girl easily chopped up. Watching her, Lin wondered how long it would take for her to run out of steam. Then the girl decided to play a trick, throwing off her helmet and showing her face. Noticing the girl, the goblins immediately stared at her with loving eyes drooling. At that very moment, she pierced the dead wizard's chest and pulled out his heart, licking it as she went. Lin realized that everything was bad and ordered everyone to watch her, but the girl had already rushed to attack. Seeing his comrades die, the mutated goblin rushed forward to fight back, but was pierced by a blade. She can even withstand the goblin's absorption power in the current situation. We need to think about how to reduce the number of victims. Having saddled the dragon, the boy asked Freya to follow him, and the rest were to retreat. Suddenly, the goblin slayer asked him to stop, as she had not seen such a smart goblin for a long time. If he let her take a closer look at him, she would spare their lives, but Lin wasn't going to fall for that. The girl realized that he didn't believe her one bit, so she decided to take off all her armor to prove the truth of her words. Lin was stunned that she took off her weapons and armor, not understanding what kind of game she was playing. Still, he decided to take a risk and went down to the ground, after which he threw back his hood and offered to talk. As it turned out, the guy exceeded all her expectations and the girl really did not try to attack. Lin reminded her that she would not touch the others, and she asked her not to worry because she keeps her promises. However, he must satisfy her. She loves to hunt and kill powerful goblins and has now pierced him with a poisoned needle. Even though he looked like a low-level goblin, he had the wisdom of a lord, which excited her greatly. Lin realized his carelessness and how stupidly he had fallen for the trick when he suddenly noticed that his comrades were behaving strangely. They all turned away, and the girl declared that they were under her control and would not look at them. Leaning on his back, the girl promised that she would not kill him because she wanted to enjoy him. She asked permission to see what kind of creature he would become in the future, and then kissed him. At this time, Siddle watched them from behind the bushes and could not believe that the goblin killer was a girl, and was doing such a thing to a goblin. But he was immediately distracted by a goblin who appeared behind him, which frightened the guy even more. A little later, Lin stated that this was a goblin lair, and she would be acting at her own risk if she followed them. He became curious about who she was and what kind of power she had, how she could control his subordinates without taking control of him. She decided to tell only if he promised to let him look at her again. It all depends on what she says, but suddenly the girl said that she was a descendant of the Goblin King, which the guy could hardly believe. This was absolutely unheard of news because she looks exactly like a human. However, Goblin Slayer explained that her mother was human, even though that was rare. It just so happened that she was raised by goblins who abused her mother. Of course, the more advanced the goblins are, the harder it is for them to give birth to offspring. But she was lucky and survived. It happened about 10 years ago. With a knife in her hand, she began to kill goblins. And after she drank all their blood dry, she immediately gained the power of a goblin lord and subdued them, and then destroyed everyone in the dungeon. The reason she can control them is because of the power of royal blood. The girl added her blood to the weapon, and as soon as she touched the goblin with the blade, he immediately died. If he couldn't resist, then she would take control of him. She was a goblin slayer. She couldn't stand them, and killing was her fun. It is no wonder that her identity was not recognized by anyone before. She was born to become an assassin and hold back the goblins. Lin then invited her to join him, although the girl thought that he was afraid of her, and she initially planned to take control of him. She clarified that the situation in the city is difficult now, so it would be better for her to return to avoid attention. The guy decided that she was being a goody-goody, but she believed that Lin belonged to her, and she protected her things. A little later, reviewing his characteristics, Lin realized that the girl gave him a lot of points, worthy of being the descendant of the king. Suddenly, he heard the tied-up Scythel turn to Loder, surprised that he was not dead. He looked like a dog, and his family's reputation would be at an all-time low, so it's no wonder the saint didn't go save him. But the knight only smiled and invited him to look at the pot that was boiling especially for him. At that very moment, the goblin picked him up and carried him to the cauldron, and the guy asked him not to kill him, promising to give him many girls. Suddenly, Loder decided to meet with the leader, but Lin was already there and was surprised that the knight only now decided to talk. The man calmly asked the guy to let go, and he would fulfill any of his requests. Hearing such a donation, Sitel immediately began to apologize to his brother because he did not want to offend him. Lin just chuckled since it was not in the knight's position to set his own conditions, but the man said that if they cut off his leg and let him go, he would bring news that Loder was alive and send more people to his family to save him. In that case, they would be able to absorb even more people. Hearing this, fear appeared on Sittel's face. Then the knight began to declare that they all must die, and Lin noticed that the man had made up his mind and therefore agreed to his proposal. At that very moment, Leah approached the leader, saying that their location would be revealed if they let him go. The next day, at the bar, the man was shouting loudly that it was all over and they were finished, but the bartender quickly calmed him down. But the knight did not calm down and said that he saw Sitel. He was without a leg and barely made it to the city. Hearing this, the other visitors immediately turned their heads in his direction and couldn't believe that Sittel and the others had failed. The mysterious hooded man began asking if both teams were dead and how only one could survive. At that very moment, the Goblin Slayer entered the bar, confirming the knight's words. The bald man ran up to her and remembered that she had also taken part in the battle. Everyone was interested in what was going on with the goblins, and according to her, there were more than 100 of them, and there were also many different species, but she killed them all. The reaction of those present was not long in coming, and they began to praise the Goblin Slayer, from whom nothing else could be expected. She was offered to drink whatever she wanted today, and they wouldn't charge her, and the others started praising her. But suddenly a huge flock of bats flew into the bar, causing a commotion. Then they all clung to the ceiling, watching the Goblin Slayer carefully. Suddenly one of the mice assumed that since she had found several hundred goblins, she knew where their lair was. But she didn't find the lair, she just finished off those she met, and then assumed that they could deal with them too. The leader of the mice asked her not to worry and to leave the task of finding the lair to them, since they were hoping for cooperation. Goblin Slayer explained that she did not like operating at night, and she was not used to cooperating with others. They were very sorry to hear this, and it looked like they would have to keep the reward for themselves, but that same night they began their search. Having flown huge distances, they did not notice that there was any army around, and the smell of blood stopped in one place. They definitely had to be inside, so the flock flew into the cave, where they found several goblins. Inside, the mice noticed very few goblins and only one mutant. Perhaps they were mistaken because it was only a medium-sized clan. However, there were a lot of big ones here, as the Goblin Slayer said, so they decided to drink their blood while they slept. But as soon as the captain wanted to approach the goblin, a beam of light immediately flew at him. He sat up and tried to understand how there could be a holy nun in a goblin lair. The sleeping goblins immediately jumped up from their places and started a fire, which was supposed to blind the night animals. At that very moment, Lynn arrived, noticing that they had dared to come here and drink their blood. Suddenly, the mice began to revolve around each other, turning into a single creature. Appearing in female guise, the vampire declared that since they had been exposed, they needed to finish off the goblins as soon as possible. She had incredibly high stats, but it was good that the guy had received information about the mercenary killers in the system in advance and was prepared. Lilith soared into the air and suggested that they see which of them would burn in the flames first. Hearing the statement, Lynn only chuckled as the rest of the goblins called for the light. By creating an incredibly bright light, they were able to blind the vampires, who could not stand such brightness. Having weakened the spell a little, Lynn concluded that fighting would not lead to anything good, and therefore suggested talking. Most likely they also came for the reward, but it is unclear why vampires who live off blood need money. But if the Holy Church had not signed an agreement prohibiting the drinking of human blood, who would go and earn money to buy blood? If they can get the vampires on their side, they might even be able to improve the abilities of the goblin race. After hearing their explanation, the guy understood everything and decided to ask directly about cooperation. He was willing to offer them blood, but their blood was not enough for long-term use. But they have other blood for such bloodthirsty creatures as they are. There are other quenchers. At first, the girls didn't understand what he was talking about, but then one of the vampires began to whisper something to the others. Legends say that there are creatures called succubi who at one time gave up blood and gave up their needs for intercourse. No, you don't need to rob and kill, you just need to saddle them, and that's the end of it. If there's one thing that's for sure, it's that the goblins have more than enough of that kind of power. And if they cooperate, they certainly won't starve. Some vampires had heard of these creatures, so they decided to give it a try. One of the girls tried to stop the lady since they were countesses, and the count was sealed, so they needed to wait for him. Too many of their sisters had died in these few hundred years. If this was true and they would no longer have to suffer, then she was willing to try. A few minutes later, the vampires watched in shock as their mistress decided to test the offer first. When she concluded that it could indeed replace fresh blood, the other vampires wanted to try it too. A little later, Leah noticed how hard it was for the master, and the vampires were going crazy from hunger. Lilith decided to accept his offer, asking what he wanted from them. It's dark here all year round, so it's a perfect place to live, and they only need to protect the cave from intruders. After thinking for a bit, the girl accepted his offer, after which she began to hum a simple song. Contact with the mercenaries was lost, and the travelers now believed that the defeat of the goblins had failed again. Meanwhile, in the city, a man called the travelers cowards and worthless. Even the goblins let them go, although they themselves were of diamond rank, but the interlocutor asked them to stop pressuring him. Suddenly, the doors to the bar opened, and a holy swordswoman walked inside, stunning everyone. The hooded man smiled at her too, glad that she had already recovered. A few minutes later, everyone was shocked that she wanted to go to the dragon's lair alone, and they were assigned to fight the goblins. The problem was that only ordinary rank people remained, and they doubted whether they could do it. It just takes a little effort, so diamond rank Allison also wanted to help deal with the goblins. Turning her head in his direction, the girl concluded that he was responsible for the task with the goblins. The only way to get to the Dragon Island was by ship. She had heard that the hooded man had the ability to control objects. He bowed and stated that it was a great honor for him to fight side by side with the Holy Swordswoman. He was confident that after everything was over, the epic rank of traveler would be in his pocket. At this time, in the dragon's lair, the girl was sleeping peacefully, hugging the egg she had recently laid. Suddenly, she heard a strange noise and sat up, trying to understand what was happening, noticing a dragon above her. Everything became clear to her, and she did not expect that the swordswoman would recover so quickly, after which she told her child that his father was an unusual goblin. Leaving the egg behind, the girl took on a dragon form, deciding to deal with her enemy once and for all. During this time, the swordswoman managed to deal with the mountain of dragons, after which the mother of dragons appeared before her. The saint was in full combat readiness and prepared for battle against the mother of the amethyst dragons. The dragon became interested in how she was able to heal and how much more she would do to them, striking from behind. The swordswoman asked not to tell her what to do, because she tried to destroy her people, and for this she would kill her. The saint immediately used a wave of sword energy, and the dragon began to spew flames. The man who was hiding behind the rock noticed that this dragon was too strong, when suddenly he pulled it out from behind the shelter. A huge dragon tail fell on the place where he was sitting, and the girl asked him to get out of the way and not interfere. The dragon opened its mouth again and began to create hundreds of sharp crystals, sending them at the opponents. Instead of dodging, the swordswoman began jumping on them to close the distance with the dragon. Meanwhile, in the nest, the baby dragon hatched from the egg and began to crawl out. And the holy swordswoman watched as the mother of dragons took on human form and knelt before her. She almost succeeded. One aimed at the head but missed a little and only hit the eye. However, the dragoness was not going to give up, fighting to the end, when suddenly another dragon flew up to the swordswoman from behind, ordering her not to dare touch his mother. Fearing for her child, the dragoness asked him to run to a safe place. The little dragon watched as his mother was killed and flew away with tears in his eyes because he could do nothing. The fellow saint asked to give it to him and began to cast a spell to hit the dragon. None of his spells hit, and the dragon spat green goo at him, which turned out to be acid. The swordswoman immediately applied a potion to his face, and the man promised that he would definitely finish off this snake. He escaped but did not finish off the man, so we need to spare him and deal with this girl who wanted to personally kill the goblins, threatening the city. Suddenly the man noticed that his magic stopped working. Maybe it was all because of these dragons. When the two heroes left the island, the little dragon returned to his mother's body and mourned her for a long time. The child promised that he would return her to the dragon's lair, and they would find a way to resurrect her. He tried with all his might to lift her up, but then he realized that he would have to absorb his mother. When he did this, his body immediately increased in size and he became an adult dragon. Sometime later, he managed to reach the dragon's lair where he brought his mother's head. Suddenly, he was attacked from behind, pinned to the ground by a huge body. The Lord was immediately informed that a stranger had been caught, and the fiery mother of dragons noticed Phoebos's head. They explained to him that this was his mother's head, and the dragon found this place through inherited memories and also asked to save his mother. The others noticed the cuts and traces of divine power, realizing whose handiwork this was, and they immediately felt sorry for Phoebus. The Lord understood that he was her child, but not a true dragon, and then asked who his father was. The young dragon admitted that he had never seen his father, but his mother said that his father was a goblin. Hearing this, the other dragons were shocked, as they did not expect something like this. The goblin's descendant was a real disgrace to the dragon race, so one of them immediately asked permission to devour this runt. This child is a descendant of the true ancient dragon lord, now dead. There is no more such blood in the entire dragon race. But in the end, it's a goblin stream, so it's very difficult to make a final decision. But if he wants to save his mother, he needs to survive the battle with the dragon standing next to him. The dragon, who had pinned the young man to the ground, thanked the Lord for finding entertainment for him. Without wasting time, the impudent dragon decided to swallow them up like goblins. But suddenly he felt pain and asked his brothers for help. But such is the decision of the ruler, he must save himself, and they will not help him. At that very second, the young dragon burst out of the opponent's body, destroying him. The Lord declared that from now on he would become the dragon's servant and could call himself Niter, but he was only interested in when they would resurrect his mother. The fire dragon asked to take Phoebus's head and take it to the world tree. The head must be connected to the roots of the tree to create a tree dragon. This is the only way that will help with the resurrection of its mother. Meanwhile, Lin tried to withstand the attack of the travelers. He had everything prepared in advance. He just needed to speed up the flow of time to finish everything faster. The system suggested that he move on to speeding up the process, to which the guy immediately agreed. At this time, the goblins and vampires were having a great time, not forgetting to praise their leader. Many high-ranking goblins died. The remains of the corpses will help the remaining goblins to evolve into hero goblins faster. After consuming over 100 corpses, the goblins finally reached level 50 and completed their evolution. Now they had a furious goblin with a strength of 1,100. As well as a giant goblin and a dark goblin with the same amount of points. Goblins are hated because they only level up by devouring others. They are different from humans who level up by killing enemies, but either way, someone dies so that someone else can gain power. Lilith didn't expect him to be so smart, adding that she hadn't drunk so much blood in a long time. In fact, she sent her men to follow the Holy Swordswoman, which piqued Lin's interest. They say that as soon as news of the deaths of hundreds of travelers reached her, She immediately left the city and is now planning to call upon the legendary hunters. The leader should be careful because her partners may be former members of the Saints' elite squad. The guy was pleasantly surprised that she left the city. It was very timely because finally there was a reason to breathe some fresh air. But suddenly their conversation was interrupted by a goblin who loudly shouted that things were bad. In the distance, a squad of goblins can be seen, heading towards their cave and wanting to attack them. There are no other tribes within a radius of 50 kilometers. Perhaps they were the owners of this cave. A few minutes later, Lin was looking down from above at a small group of goblins, including one huge one. It was a level 50 wild goblin, and the guy had never met this hero before. He had considerable strength, so Lin became interested in what tribe he was from, because such a hero could only be a squad leader. Then the leader gave the order to kill his squad, but warned that they were definitely not weak, although the rest of the goblins were not afraid at all. The wild goblin noticed that there was a smell of blood nearby, although his younger comrades did not smell anything. The elder was sure that there was a lot of food in the cave, and soon they would be able to have a proper meal. At that very moment, Lin's subordinate appeared out of nowhere and attacked the enemy, forcing him to fall to his knees. Noticing the mutated goblin, everyone immediately ran away, but not everyone managed to escape. Suddenly, spikes began to emerge from the ground, destroying the goblins one by one. While running away, one of the goblins realized that the captured lair needed to be reported as quickly as possible, but Lin shot an arrow into his back. The enemy leader thought that this guy was one of the low-ranking goblins. Lin looked at the wild goblin that was poisoned, and also noticed that it came from the goblin lands. A little later, he was chained to the wall, but he did not calm down and asked the invaders to get out of there. He was angry that they dared to ask him questions, and Lin decided that he should be taught a little lesson. However, the monster doubted that he would succeed, because he was a real beast and nothing would happen to him from his blows. But just 10 minutes later, he realized that he could not withstand the torture any longer, and was ready to answer any question. Smiling, Lin began to ask what tribe he was from, where it was located, and why he had come. He is from the tribe of the Beast Lord of the Forest, which is in the west. Its ruler used to live here. He asked to return to pick up some things. Their leader, the leader of the goblins, and very soon he will become the hegemon, which stunned the guy. They came to take the treasures that are very important to the leader, but Lin can look for it himself. He eventually found the corpse ring, a ring made by the leader of the corpse clan that, when activated, can seal the soul of opponents inside the ring. Lin didn't expect that such treasures existed, and the goblin asked to let him go because he had said everything and given him the treasure. Putting the ring on himself, the guy declared that he would let go of his flesh, but not his soul. After activating the ring, a green cloud burst out of it and headed towards the goblin. Lin was only able to absorb 200 combat power, but if he absorbed a stronger soul, things would be different. Since the power is in his hands, the tribe will definitely not sit idly by. Perhaps it will be possible to use them in the fight against people. But he still didn't fully understand how to use the ring. The Goblin Slayer recognized the monster from the Beast Lord's tribe. Lin was surprised that the girl knew about them, and she added that he would not be able to compete with them. The tribe of the Beast Lord belongs to the Empire, and the lions live near a large grave, and it is better not to go there. She tried to find out how the guy killed him in the first place, but the leader was interested in finding out about the big grave. This is the place where the Lord of the Forest in the West lives. The grave is where the 12th rank monsters, world-class creatures, live. After thinking for a bit, the guy began to release the goblin's soul from the ring, simultaneously asking the girl to take control of it. She must order him to return to the Beastmaster's tribe to report that the ring has been stolen. However, it was not they who stole the ring, but the royal aristocrats of the Lion Empire. Lin specifically let Siddle go. Setting a trap, they use Philemon to gain more experience and get rid of the opponents. As a result, in a conflict between two parties, the benefit will go to the third party, while the first is busy fighting. Meanwhile, in the palace, the Count called his son useless and asked him to get out of here because he had disgraced their family. But Siddle asked to listen. These goblins are not only very strong, but also smart. They are not their equal. Even the Grey Hat Squad died, but Loder was still alive. Finding news made Philemon even more angry. The heirs of two great families lost to some goblin, and the guy must realize that now everyone is laughing at them. The boy lowered his head to the ground and continued to ask his father for forgiveness, although he understood that it was pointless. But he was even more frightened by that same goblin, and he wanted to forget what he had to go through. Seeing his condition, Philemon realized what a pitiful laughingstock his son was and asked to take him out. Suddenly, a mustachioed man entered the hall and asked the Count not to be angry. He would like to kill the units with him in order to wash away the shame from his family, which the Count found suspicious. A man must know that after the king's order has been issued, aristocrats above the rank of count must wait for the order, and are not allowed to create troops on their own. Moreover, the king had already handed over this mission to the Holy Swordswoman, but the man noticed that his horizons were too narrow. If only the saint acts, the king will doubt their necessity, which cannot be allowed. In order for the king to give the go-ahead, the aristocrats need to report on the worsening situation with the goblins. Only then will he allow the aristocracy to provide troops and the goblins will come to an end. The count agreed to this, but saw his true intentions, so he offered to send his scum son to the king. A few days later, in the goblin cave, Lin demonstrated the pistol's action by shooting an apple on Loder's head. The guy didn't expect the homemade pistol to work so well, only the gunpowder quickly ran out. Kasana was surprised by such a curiosity and said that she also wanted to shoot, asking to teach her. Suddenly, a goblin scout ran up to them and reported that troops had gathered in the city and were all equipped. Other goblins are also approaching. It seems that this is the same tribe of the Beastmaster. Despite these words, Lin only smiled. You understand that a great show awaits them soon. The wild goblin had already reported to his leader that the human troops had taken the ring, and he had barely escaped, for which he had been punished. The leader only needed to wave his hand to trample his subordinate into the ground. Then he loudly ordered the other goblins to return his ring, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, the city's inhabitants gathered together to greet Count Philemon and stirred. The man on the horse immediately asked where the Holy Swordswoman was, and it turned out that she was away on business. And since she wasn't here, they weren't going to waste time. But the dragon's servant was angry that the count dared to ignore him. Stir just smiled invisibly, explaining that they had actually come here because of the goblins. Suddenly, a horde of goblins descended upon them from the shadows, and somehow managed to penetrate the city. Philemon was glad that the damn goblins themselves were going into their hands, and decided to show the power of the Empire of Lions. The rest of the knights also rushed into battle, dealing with the goblins with surprising ease. Watching them from the air, Lin realized that the situation was even better than he thought. Having defeated another goblin, Philemon realized that they were just a bunch of low-grade scum, and there was no need to be afraid of them. Looking at his subordinates, the man guessed that they would finish the battle in less than an hour. But at that very second, something attacked his knights from the air, turning the tide of the battle. Then, a level 79th Goblin Beastmaster with a total combat power of 3,000 walked out through the gate. Even Lin didn't understand where he got so much power from, and the monster seemed disgusting to him. You understand that the situation is turning not in their favor? The Count gave the order to the knights to retreat. They weren't sure if it was the goblin leader, but they would have to deal with him anyway. Suddenly, Loder's sister Lona came out to them, telling her father that they would distract them, and the soldiers would deal with the rest. Sterda asked her to be careful because she must not become a scumbag like her brother. A group of warriors immediately rushed at the goblin, attacking him with fire spells. However, this did not cause any damage to the monster, so they decided to lure it out of the city. Lin knew that this was bad because if the goblin retreated, he would run into his subordinates. However, they lured him out in such a way that no one came across them along the way, and the guy realized that this girl had no shortage of luck. However, the Beast Lord managed to destroy several travelers along the way. The survivors had no intention of relaxing and continued in the same spirit, attacking with all their might. During the battle, Lona thought that she was better than the Academy representative, so she had to win this battle. She used the highest rank martial art, Spearbreaker, to stab the goblin in the chest. This girl's total strength was 1,700 points. The others only had 1,000 each, but Lin didn't think that everything would be so interesting. However, the Beast Lord stood on his feet even after such an attack and only became more angry at the girl. Concentrating its energy, the monster used the Beastmaster's roar. It was such a powerful energy that it even made Lin incredibly furious. He needed to calm down and increase the distance, flying as far as possible. The rest of the travelers fell dead, and Lona did not understand why everything turned out this way and where such a strong goblin came from. When the monster approached her, the girl realized that she was desperate and that no one could cope with it. There was horror written on her face as she asked to be saved, even though she knew no one would come. The Counts noticed that Lona was in trouble, but they could not retreat, when suddenly they noticed something strange. Stirred noticed that the goblin had grabbed her daughter, causing him to become enraged and run forward. The goblin had no intention of backing down as he watched the man try to attack him, and then swung his fist. One blow was enough to slam the man into the ground, but the other knights began to protect the Count. Philemon asked them to hurry and deal the final blow, hoping that it would all be over soon, while the hooded man conjured a fireball. After making a successful attack, he noticed that the monster had fallen to its knees and the air already stank of burning. Turning to his comrades, the wizard shouted loudly that he had won. Prove to the others who a real traveler is. But suddenly the goblin rose to his feet again and opened his mouth to eat the unsuspecting man. Continuing to watch from the air, Lin noticed that this guy had already begun to evolve. Now he has transformed into a level 80 Fury Goblin. The total strength has reached 3,100. This is the level of a hegemon. Although he has just evolved, his combat power assessment should not increase for a long time. This is already very frightening, and if he continues to devour everything on the go, people will definitely lose. He had already absorbed all the experience, but then Lin would have nothing left. Perhaps he would have to intervene and suppress it. Having crushed his comrade, the hegemon declared that no one else would escape, because there was nowhere to run. He then ordered the remaining goblins to attack, and he would execute the renegades on the spot. The knights immediately prepared to defend themselves when they noticed hordes of goblins running towards them. Philemon suggested going back and closing the city gates while the goblin ordered everyone to give chase. Noticing that the knights were fleeing into the city, Lin whistled a command to his subordinates. They immediately emerged from their hiding place and began to collect the corpses to take them to the cave. Noticing a bright glow nearby, Lin ordered everyone to hurry and retreat. At this time, Philemon declared that he did not have what the goblin was looking for, and he could kill him if he wanted. Then the man grabbed the monster, trying to understand whether he refused to fulfill his conditions. Suddenly, a huge sword began to descend from the sky, from which the goblin barely managed to escape. As the sword pierced the ground, the holy swordswoman immediately landed on its hilt. At that very second, another unprecedented force attacked the monster. The person who attacked him was Marxer. Austin decided to find out if it was necessary to treat the goblin like that. Seeing the heroes who had arrived, Philemon rejoiced at the holy swordswoman and the members of the hunting group. When dawn came, Lin didn't expect the hunters to arrive just then. At first he wanted to try to suppress this monster, but it seemed his intervention was not required. At this time, the goblin absorbed his kin, activating the true nature of cruelty skill, after which he began to heal. He had quite a strong skill, but judging by the injury, it would take some time for him to fully recover. Marxer was surprised that this monster did not die even though his stomach and chest were pierced. After all, he had the rank of a hegemon. To everyone's surprise, the goblin declared that he was lost and did not want to fight, asking permission to leave and never return. The swordswoman frowned upon hearing such a statement and decided to find out if he was the leader. The goblin agreed, adding that he only wanted his little thing back, but the count swore that he had taken nothing. The girl was sure that this was definitely the guy, but Osden didn't understand who she was talking about. This goblin is the head of another tribe, located 100 miles from here, and the city was attacked by another goblin head living nearby. It turns out that their goblin deliberately lured this leader here to wear them out. They doubted that the goblin could think of such a thing, but the count complained that many travelers had died at his paws and they could not let him go so easily. Then Osden smiled broadly and asked permission to solve this problem. But just as he was about to do something, a huge tornado passed by the goblin. The monster took advantage of the moment to run, and the saint noticed a dragon in the air. Having shown his presence, Lin realized that this goblin could be useful, but it was a pity that he would have to end. If the guy lets him escape, he might attack him in the future, taking advantage of his helplessness. Lin decided to retreat, but the holy swordswoman couldn't let him escape. She managed to knock him down a little, but was surprised that the little goblin was able to dodge, and it looks like she was right. The next second, the girl used Steel Hurricane, and Lin ordered the dragon to dodge. Bypassing the enemy attacks, he tried to break the distance, because if he did not run away, he would hardly be able to survive the battle. The disgruntled swordswoman shouted after him that no matter where he ran, she would still get to him. However, the guy decided to see what she would do soon because he was not standing still either. Meanwhile, the escaped goblin realized that he couldn't wait any longer. He had to take the treasure before anyone else got there. When he reached the appointed place, he felt that someone was watching him. Suddenly, fragments of memory surfaced in his head. How his friend said that his thing was here. Then the count appeared to him, who swore that he had taken nothing, especially the goblin's thing. The monster realized that they were deceiving him and promised that everyone would die, no matter who was targeting him. And sticking his head into the cave, he ordered everyone inside to come out. Leah, Kasana, and Yue immediately shuddered in fear, but did not retreat from each other. If a monster breaks in, they will come out and deal with it, although the chief has already told them to sit still many times. Suddenly, the goblin slayer appeared behind them, declaring that he trusted Lin and that he would not allow anything to happen to them. Meanwhile, the same goblin emerged from the water, where he was met by Lin, who knew where the monster would appear. It was already impossible to escape from his trap, and at that moment he sent a stream of fire in his direction. This was definitely not enough, so the guy shot him with a crossbow. but the goblin continued to close the distance, managing to knock the dragon down. Suddenly, the goblin noticed a guy walking towards him, and on his finger was a ring that belonged to him. The monster did not understand where he got it from, and realized who exactly was involved in the theft of his ring, after which he asked for it to be returned. Lin calmly replied that he didn't want to, which greatly angered the goblin who rushed to attack him. It was easy for the guy to dodge his blow while in a relaxed state. He wondered how a monster with such a clumsy body could compare to him. At that very second, the guy instantly appeared behind him, and the system gave him the super high skill of soul destruction. Without wasting any time, Lin activated the skill, directing all of its power towards the enemy. Approaching the defeated goblin, the guy did not expect that he would actually be able to acquire a new skill. But suddenly the goblin survived and hit him in the stomach, throwing him tens of meters away. He rushed forward to strike again, but this time the boy put his hands out in front of him to defend himself. His opponent was strong. The good thing is that he had previously fought with a team of hunters, so he was a little weakened. The monster was surprised that Lin was able to return, recognizing the boy's strength. Lin did not go completely into defense and began to quickly counterattack. Realizing his situation, he didn't want to lose to some weak goblin, but he immediately fell to the ground, which could give him some nourishment. If he gets hit in his vital organs, he will die 100%. Goblin Slayer asked him if he wanted to seal his soul into a ring to increase his power. They had some problems, and in the midst of the battle, the Holy Swordswoman's squad intervened, so he was exposed. Among them is a man named Ace who has the ability to go underground. He can easily find them. This goblin is not from the Great Tomb, so its past can be used to have a creature from the Great Tomb destroy their enemies. The girl decided that it was dangerous and better not to mess with the guys from the Great Grave, but it was the best way. Lin asked to be ordered to report to the entire being from the Great Grave and bring the demon ring so that they could take revenge. Having agreed to kill herself from the goblins, she took off her glove and cut her palm, releasing blood onto the goblin's body and whispering a spell. Rising, the goblin noticed that the girl was only a pitiful slave, but she dared to surpass her master. Meanwhile, the goblins made a fire and roasted the meat, gobbling it up with gusto. Lin had accumulated 300 points and could now summon a 6th-rank demon who would obey him in everything. He thought about summoning it to create an additional defense, but the strength of a rank 6 demon was about the same as a furious goblin. Even if there are 3 furious goblins at once, it is not a fact that they will be able to defeat the squad of the Holy Swordswoman. Dark Fusion can absorb parts of the enemy's body and merge them with itself. Each part of the body can receive certain characteristics. Blood of Destruction attacks inflict a destruction effect, neutralize holy type abilities, and weaken the enemy's stats. Dark Fusion doesn't look strong, but if it's combined with his gene absorption ability, it becomes much more powerful. For example, fusing with the wings of a civilian dragon and then absorbing the flight skills. Fusion can also be used behind the jellyfish's eyes and then absorbing its petrification skills. But the Blood of Destruction will be the only way to resist the sacred system. But now he has no demons with which he could merge. The system congratulated him on his choice of the exchange of Blood of Destruction. The gentleman received the effect of a miracle. 300 life points were returned to him. Seeing this, Lin began to praise the system, wondering what he would do with it if it were a woman. The Dark Fusion exchange was successful, and this may just solve the problem of the Goblin Absorption gene's limitations. Noticing his strange reaction, Yue decided to find out what was going on with him, but he just laughed. The goblin girl immediately blushed and asked if he wanted to relax a little. Lin immediately began to make excuses, deciding to take at least one day off, since his body would soon not be able to withstand it. Suddenly, a goblin ran up to him and announced that this man had done something wrong again and had even stolen 2 weapons. Arriving at Loader's, Lin noticed the man sitting in front of the gun and apologizing to his father and sister. As the boy approached him, Loader noticed the goblin and began crawling towards him, repeating his name. The man's eyes filled with tears when he decided to find out if his parents were still alive. Lin said that his father was bitten to death by the hegemon, and as for his sister, her body had long been desecrated. Clutching his head, Loader realized that he shouldn't have behaved like that. He should have acted like a smart guy. Euphraia was glad to be alive, and the man hoped that the people from the church would be able to save her. But at that very second, the knight could not bear it and jumped up, ran straight towards the wall at full speed, hitting his head. Walking towards his body, Lin was surprised that he was emotionally exhausted, but still thought about others. So much time has passed and the boy's hatred for him has dissipated, so it's time to ease his suffering. Meanwhile, in the great forest of graves, the Beast Lord reached Lord Nu. At his call, a huge, monstrous bull immediately came out, which was tens of times larger than the goblins. The goblin wanted to come back, but they killed his entire clan, so he came to the master for help. Giving the ring back, the monster asked to continue the fight and listen to the order while he returned the ring. Taking the ring in his hands, Niu asked what was required of him, and the goblin asked him to help him kill everyone. However, he should have known that they had an agreement with the church and they could not invade human territory. The bull will let him look at the territory, the goblin can take revenge, and he will support him. He himself was glad about this because so much time had passed since he had eaten fresh flesh. A few days later, Lin was in his cave looking through the stats. After a few days of training, he had almost mastered the use of the Blood of Doom. Although his level has increased, the total strength of the Holy Swordswoman is 4,000, which is a very large gap. There were a lot of possible scenarios, and it was necessary to find the most effective and safe one. But it seems like the only way to take it is to unite. But for now, he is one step ahead, so he can take his army and attack the city. At that very moment, the Goblin Slayer approached him and announced that the furious goblins were waiting for him at the cave. Before he left, the girl hugged him from behind and asked if they should go into town with him. But there's no need for this. Since they will be fighting against the Holy Swordswoman, her presence can complicate the situation. She had already given him the order to obey those goblins, otherwise he would have to be punished. But suddenly the guy asked to forget about it because it was still unknown who would punish whom. After passing through the waterfall, Lin noticed both the Beastmaster and the other huge goblins. The new demon bull was surprised that his friend was a lowly goblin who seemed very small compared to the others. He hoped that at best a 6th-rank demon would come to them, but it seemed he was wrong. Suddenly, they all turned around and headed back, although the Beast Lord tried to convince him that the guy was not a weakling. A little later, the goblin and the demons reached the city, reminding each other that there were many swordswomen inside. Feeling some tremors, the knights first decided that an earthquake had occurred, but then they noticed a crowd of bull demons running towards them. Lin watched everything from the air and did not expect that the bull demon was so terrifying. In his opinion, the intelligent goblin was much more terrifying. The guy knew in advance that the city would definitely belong to him, although now it was terrorized by demons. While destroying the building, one of the monsters smelled fresh meat and grabbed the man. He was about to eat it when suddenly some force struck him in the back, knocking him to the ground. The surviving man turned his head, noticing the Holy Swordswoman and her team. Austin didn't understand where so many bull demons came from, but Marxer decided that they came from the graves. They needed to finish off this goblin at the very beginning, and the swordswoman said that it was her mistake. And she was ready to correct this mistake herself, and therefore immediately rushed into the attack. The girl easily dodged the monster's blows and then stopped him with his bare fist. Lin landed on the roof of the house to get a better view of the battle. The overall strength of the bull demon is slightly lower than that of the Holy Swordswoman, but he has an advantage in strength. If she is restrained, it will be easier for him to act. Meanwhile, Time 22 decided to fight the goblin by activating earth magic. Lin smiled as he waited for the warrior to start using this technique before using the earth element against him. There was a huge explosion, after which the knight fell to the ground unconscious. But just as the goblin was about to devour him, Ima noticed it, realizing that she needed to save her comrade. Pulling back the bowstring, the girl used an advanced archery skill, the divine power of wind. The arrows failed to reach the goblin as they were deflected by a sudden tornado that appeared out of nowhere. Lin is lucky that he has agility skills. Otherwise, he would not have been able to stand up to the elf race. The boy asked the goblin to leave the night and help others, although his technique turned out to be very useful. Then Lin used absorption instead of the goblin, which stunned Marxer's comrades. Having struck the bull demon, Osden immediately turned towards the goblin, wanting to avenge his comrade. The man used the advanced skill Splitting Strike, but Lin easily dodged it. He then used another aftertaste skill, finally destroying his opponent. Ima didn't understand how this was possible because this goblin was able to eat even Osden. Lin rose 5 levels at once and his total strength increased to 3,200. But suddenly, Ima fired her bow, piercing the cover Lin was sitting behind and wounding him in the shoulder. Suddenly, he noticed another arrow, but was able to dodge it, and after it, a continuous hail of arrows began. Luckily, he was lucky enough to react in time, but the girl began to speed up her shooting, and if it weren't for the stone wall, he wouldn't have dodged. Lin ordered the goblin to go and tear down the bell tower to create a distraction. The goblin immediately rushed towards the building where Ima was sitting, crashing into it with his whole body. The guy realized that now was the perfect moment, after which he took out a crossbow and fired towards the girl. At incredible speed, she was able to dodge it, falling to the ground as the building continued to collapse. However, she won't be able to catch up with him now. It looks like she needs to wait for her skills to recharge before continuing her attack. Lin tried to escape, but the archer began to knock her arrow again to prevent him from getting away. Suddenly, the girl fell to her knees and Lin stopped, realizing that her strength was running out. She needed to hold on a little longer, and she believed that she was still able to fight. Approaching her, the Beast Lord opened his mouth to swallow the girl, but Lin stopped him. Now she belonged to him. Ima was a powerful elf, so he couldn't just eat her. He carried her aside and then waited for her to regain consciousness. Discovering that her hands were tied, Ima immediately began to scream loudly and ask what he was doing, although she herself had known everything for a long time. Lin loomed over her, declaring that she would soon find out everything herself and that her fate had already been decided. Meanwhile, the Holy Swordswoman dealt with the bull demon, realizing that it was not easy with him. Why did she turn her head and was surprised to see Ima pointing the knife towards her stomach? The girl wanted to stop her and rushed toward her, but it was too late. Before her death, Ima said that all her comrades were dead, and she did not want to give birth to a goblin child, so she asked the swordswoman to avenge them. Having surrounded her, the demons noticed that the master had killed the girl, but who had eaten her and who was now the new leader remained unclear. Rising to her feet, the holy swordswoman felt only rage and unprecedented strength within her. To everyone's surprise, the girl pierced herself with her own sword and soared into the air, surrounding herself with a golden dome. Philemon tried to find out what was happening to her, and the girl asked the swordsman to move away, otherwise they would die. The knights immediately ran away because it was the first time they had seen the holy swordswoman like this. Lin also didn't understand what was happening when he suddenly discovered a huge girl with angel wings in the air. At that very moment, divine light began to shine beneath him, just like beneath the other monsters. The girl used the ultimate swordsman technique, sacred retribution. Having destroyed almost all the monsters, the swordswoman returned to her normal form, although her combat power was now above 5,000 units. Luckily, Lin managed to escape. He initially thought that this girl was a knight, but it turns out that she is a mage, and it is unclear why she would risk her life so much for the sake of increasing her strength. It's not for nothing that she is called the invincible holy swordswoman. The kingdom's protective holy sword is too powerful. The knights immediately rejoiced and began to praise the saint, wishing her long life. But at that very second, the girl's fighting power began to drop sharply, and blood began to flow from the wound on her stomach and mouth. Lin was pleased, and the swordswoman declared that this was not the end, and the real killer had not yet been destroyed. Just as she was about to drink the healing potion, a tornado flew at her, striking her straight in the wound on her stomach. The knights and the count were in shock, as they realized that their strongest soldier had been taken by surprise. Noticing a goblin on the roof, Philemon began to insult him, because he dared to attack from behind. Now the swordswoman needed to heal her wounds, so the count decided to deal with him himself, and rushed to attack. However, the man didn't even have time to run half the way before he received a crossbow shot to the forehead. Lin smirked, reminding him that he was a goblin, so there was no point in reading. The other knights immediately surrounded him, wanting to kill him, and avenge the count and the others. Having jumped up from his place, the guy began to deal with the soldiers at incredible speed. But they could not retreat in order to gain time for the saint, and for this they had to give up their hearts. Hearing such a statement, Lin immediately approached the knight and plunged his hand into his chest, grabbing his heart. Seeing this, the holy swordswoman used a mad blade, but Lin managed to dodge it. The girl turned around sharply and tried to kick him, but the guy put his hands out to defend himself. It is very difficult to deal with her. Even though her strength has dropped to 2,500, it is still very difficult to deal with her. Then Lin decided to use the highest sorcery, threads, directing them towards the swordswoman and knights. In turn, the girl used the divine sacred sword, barely missing the goblin. The boy realized that using demon skills against her would have little effect. If this continues, they will probably both get injured or even lose. The saint can suppress him, that's a fact. Swinging her sword, the girl stated that they needed to make a decision today, and Lin suggested that she enjoyed the taste of defeat. She missed and hit the ground, but at that moment, other knights arrived, wanting to help her. Without wasting any time, Lin grabbed one of the warriors and threw him at the holy swordswoman. While she was dodging, the guy managed to deal with the rest of the knights. The girl tried to help the warriors get up, while ordering the goblin not to run away and to come to her. She realized that the guy was using the fighters' bodies to dodge attacks and was definitely faster than her. As long as he breaks the saint's faith, reducing her defense, he still has a chance to win. An hour later, the tired knights asked the saint to kill her, as they could no longer bear this torture. But Lin hastened to stop them, clarifying that everything must end here and now. The girl again asked him not to run away, after which she swung her sword, despite the fact that Lin had put a knight in front of him. At the last second, the guy dodged and the warrior died, so the swordswoman will soon go crazy. Unable to bear it any longer, the saint began to cut everyone in a row, not distinguishing who was an enemy and who was an ally. Lin praised her, noting that the saint's methods of killing were much more terrible than those of demons. Suddenly, the girl stopped in shock, realizing what she had just done. She had killed everyone she was supposed to protect. Lin realized that this was his chance, so he applied his blood to the dagger and threw it at the swordswoman's chest. Falling to her knees, the girl began to turn to God, repenting that it was not her fault. Approaching her, the guy declared that, defiled by the blood of defeat, she would lose all her divine powers. She's a very strong person with her weaknesses, so why not just become his person? The goblin invited her to join the army and overthrow these religious fanatics who control the world with him. A little later, he heard the Beast Lord notice the people from the church, after which he began to run away. Turning his head, Lin noticed a huge crowd of knights clad in steel armor. Looking at the saint, the bishop, the sacred guardian of the cross could not believe that such a misfortune would befall her. Punishable, this goblin is a real demon, and his weak and harmless appearance hides a terrifying power and face. The Holy Guard were to obey in the name of God and contribute to the prosperity of this world. All the knights immediately held their swords in front of them, activating demon exorcism magic, and then rushed to attack the goblins. They all wore heavy armor, but they were still too fast. These guys were much stronger than the guy thought. However, that didn't matter now, so he used the Blood of Decay, his new skill. A stream of blood hit one of the knights in the face, causing his holy power to begin to fade. Taking advantage of the moment, Lin decided to retreat, because even ordinary soldiers have the strength of 3,000, and it looks like the plan will have to be changed. The knights need to prepare for their return. This child needs purification and guidance from a priest, otherwise he may fall into debauchery. The bishop was asked to deal with the goblins, but he said it was too late. As for Ephraia, the archbishop said that the deity had already chosen a new priestess. There was no need to look for her anymore. Having run a sufficient distance, Lin noticed that all the bodies were buried, but fortunately the body of the Minotaur was still here, and it would be possible to feast on it. He was able to reach level 80, and upon returning home, the girls immediately started asking how everything went. They were terribly curious, but they also noticed that the leader had become stronger again. The boy was surprised that they still didn't know about his actions, after which he declared that the holy swordswoman was his. The four girls opened their eyes in surprise, not fully believing that he was able to overcome her and lie with her. This was obvious, but there was bad news. The Holy Church took her away. Suddenly, the Goblin Slayer pounced on him, declaring that he was the coolest, but the guy still had things to discuss. This time, they have won a major victory and gained time to develop. They need to move to a new place so as not to fear the revenge of the human race. They needed to find a place where even people of the Holy Church do not dare to go without permission. A holy grave. Sometime later, the goblins and elves began to pack their things in preparation for the move. Since the Holy Sepulchre has entered into an agreement with the Holy Church not to attack each other, they have all the conditions for a prosperous development there. Their main goal is to catch people, not to kill them. And as for those who resist, they can do with them as they see fit. In just a few days, passing through more than 10 villages, they had captured 230 women, which was far from the desired number. 700 kilometers along the road, 19 villages, 2 small towns. Catching more than 1,000 people should not be a problem. Besides, there was a small town ahead. I needed to prepare the bags, do everything quickly, and continue on my way. Meanwhile, in the city, the mayor was asked not to worry because, according to the news, it was just a group of goblins robbing villages. The knights announced that the guys from their cohort would not be afraid of the goblin horde. They would stand at the city gates, and as soon as they appeared, they would kill each of them. Suddenly, one cripple asked them not to be careless. These goblins are very scary and are bigger in size than normal goblins. Ace said that there was no need to worry about the size since he could even smash heroes to smithereens. Frank ordered everyone to get ready because these guys should be here soon. Suddenly, a patrol knight standing on the tower announced that the goblins were advancing. The warriors immediately went out the gate, and Ace suggested that the guys see who could kill the most goblins. The loser had to buy everyone drinks for a month, but the others immediately refused. The man asked them not to worry, as he could handle everything himself, and asked the others to just watch. However, he did not have time to finish speaking, as he noticed a huge horde running towards them, and a huge dragon was flying above them. Ace fell to the ground shaking, trying to figure out why the dragon was with the goblins. The knights immediately started running back, calling the goblins damned deceivers along the way. Watching them, Lin was surprised that so many people had prepared for their arrival. The goblins still managed to get into the city, where they began their atrocities. The men immediately began to complain to Ace, who promised to deal with the goblins, but was now lying under the table and shaking with fear. While he was trying to figure out why these goblins were so scary and whether they were goblins at all, one of these monsters crawled up to him. A little later, the same goblin brought the man to his owner, noticing that he looked quite strong and did not know what to do with him. Even though he was level 50, his total strength was only slightly over 700, about the same as most of the others in the squad. The guy suggested that they deal with it themselves, and then rest and prepare for the road. 10 days later, the goblin warriors led a huge crowd of girls who had been kidnapped from villages and towns. There would be a lot more work in the future, but Yue promised him that they would get through it. Leah added that if he could satisfy her at least once a day, then she would be capable of anything. But in that case, Lin would be very tired, and now he understood what premature death was. A little later, the Beast Lord brought the boy to his tribe, which is now called the Tribe of Madmen. First, you need to find a place to rest, after which Lin will go to scout the area. A little later, he was surprised that there were so many monsters above rank 5 living in such a small area. A month later, in the city, a group of church servants were kneeling in front of the door and praying. The king decided to find out how Alice was doing. As it turned out, labor had begun 10 minutes ago, and the baby would soon be born. At this time, the holy swordswoman lay on the bed and strained, while the sisters supported her. But as soon as the child was born, the women discovered the goblin with horror and involuntarily screamed in fear. One of the nuns wanted to do something to him, but Alice sternly asked her not to touch him. Suddenly, the baby began to crawl towards his mother, and the woman assumed that he was alone, and immediately after birth, he began to speak. Alice picked him up and confirmed that he was very hungry, while her eyes were completely empty. At that moment, the king entered the room, noticing that his daughter was breastfeeding the goblin. The man became angry and could not believe that the Holy Maiden of the Sword was taking the goblin for her child, after which he gave the order to find his father. Looking at the child, the girl said that she would not have dared to rebel before, but such is God's punishment. The king did not understand what she was talking about because it was she who was fighting with all her might for the sake of the people of the kingdom, so the great God would not punish her. But she did something that angered the great God. She killed many soldiers, the great God deprived her of her power and imposed punishment. The old nun tried to console her, saying that this was not a great punishment from the great God, just bad luck. But Alice pushed her aside sharply, declaring that they did not understand anything. She is no longer the Holy Maiden of the Sword. She is an unfortunate woman named Alice who gave birth to a goblin. Then the girl jumped up from the bed and menacingly ordered everyone to get out of there. A little later, the king invited Klein into the throne room, asking if he knew why he had been summoned. The guy replied that he would definitely put an end to the chaos in the goblin tribe. For the sake of his family, for the sake of his uncle, for the sake of those dead princes, he was ready to avenge everyone. Then the king decided to ask the next question. Is he afraid of the big grave? But even if he has to face the inhabitants of the large grave, he is not afraid at all. The man decided to give him 10,000 elite soldiers and another 12 holy knights to accompany him, so that he could conquer the goblin tribe. The boy could not believe his ears that he would be leading so many soldiers and church ministers, but he promised that he would not let the kingdom down. Meanwhile, Lin asked Leah to call all the elves to help their sisters with the birth. Suddenly, the Beast Lord ran up to the leader, declaring that there were many monsters ahead, and they would not be able to stop them. And the boy realized that they were attracted by sounds, and among the monsters were tigers, scorpions, spiders, and demons. Lin scanned a 10-kilometer radius, but had never seen so many monsters before. He thought that in a large grave, it would be possible to freely expand the territory and build a base. It was now the key breeding season, so he didn't expect to attract so many monsters. He realized that there was nothing he could do, so he ordered the goblins to lead the people out from the back of the cliff. Suddenly, someone's voice above him asked about the baby goblin being able to control the dragon. This level 90 man-eating hawk was clearly the lord of the monsters in this area. This was already said after an agreement was made between the large grave and the church. The cannibal no longer had contact with people. Lin thought that he could cooperate, while the hawk asked if the guy was the chief of this tribe. The goblin answered in the affirmative, and then asked if he could help drive away these monsters. The ogre did not understand why he should help him, but Lin promised to give him 10 people. After thinking for a moment, the hawk used his powers to get rid of the uninvited guests. Meanwhile, in the city, the people rioted when they learned that the saint had given birth to a goblin, and was now unworthy of holding a blade again. She raises goblins, but is still considered a saint, which was very disgusting, although they once loved her very much. The king was in the worst situation since the problem with the goblins had not yet been solved, and now there was this, on one side the people, on the other the daughter, and the decision was his. Entering Alice's chambers, the man found the woman playing with her son, not expecting her to change so much because of one goblin. If he had known about this, he would have killed him immediately, and now he pulled out his sword and asked his daughter to move away because he could hurt her. The king wanted to strike quickly at the child, but Alice intercepted the blade with her bare hand. However, the man was not going to retreat. For the sake of the people and the future of the empire, he must return it to the true path. Without thinking twice, the girl grabbed her sword and then pointed it at her father's throat. She couldn't believe that even he would do this to her, when suddenly the girl was struck by a sacred light, a top-level skill. At that very moment, the cardinal entered the room using another top-tier sacred skill. The king decided to leave the decision to the cardinal because, looking at her, he could not decide. But Alice screamed that this was her punishment. She had to accept the punishment of the gods because she no longer had divine power. However, it was not the gods who abandoned her. It was she who abandoned them, and now the man asked for this goblin to be given to him. At this time, the king went out into the street to listen to how the people rejoiced that he had delivered them from this monster. But they also asked where the saint was and whether she was dead. Suddenly, everyone simultaneously flinched, noticing the goblin cub, which the king threw to the ground, having done what they wanted. But then he sadly added that if anyone else dared to say even a word about the holy maiden of the sword, he himself would bear responsibility. The next day, a worried nun ran into the throne room, announcing that Alice had disappeared. Meanwhile, in the tribe, one of the goblins reached the level of berserker and could now use magic. The other goblins said that it was nothing special, and then asked the leader to give them more meat and blood, so that they could also reach level 70. There is no shortage of monsters in the forest, if they want to eat. Let them go and catch them themselves at the same time, increasing their combat experience, but in fact, they do not seek to increase their strength. They only survive thanks to Lin, and although it is very dangerous outside, being here with him is far from safe either. The goblins immediately asked the chief not to be angry and hurried to retreat, while the berserker hurried to help them, at the same time releasing his energy. Looking at them indifferently, the guy realized that he was already spoiling them, and they were completely hanging their legs on him. Suddenly he jumped up from his seat, noticing a man-eating hawk flying towards him. He wanted to introduce him to one ruler, and the boy replied that he would be glad to meet other rulers. The more pads you know, the better. If you run into someone you can't mess with, you can use these guys as cover. The hawk was glad that he did not mind because it was the one who was standing behind him. And, turning around, Lin saw the ruler of the south, the golden monitor lizard. Looking at his stats, the guy realized that he wasn't particularly strong, although his combat power was 3,990. Lin decided to keep up the conversation with him, asking if he liked people. These people looked too tasty, so he wanted to kill them and divide them equally, but the hawk reminded him that he only wanted to eat one. Varen reminded them that everything in their zone belonged to them, so they didn't care about the goblin. However, the hawk was adamant and declared that he was the one in charge here, so he asked the monster to return south. Varen asked him not to pretend, because his clansmen had not even eaten anyone. But he was not ashamed to call himself a cannibal, so he again offered to divide everything equally. Suddenly Lin couldn't stand it and got angry, asking why the hell he was crawling here, offering something like that because he himself couldn't eat that much. Varen also began to lose patience, not understanding how such a pathetic goblin dared to talk to him. The hawk stood up to protect the boy and asked the monsters for the last time to leave, otherwise he might die. Varen realized that he simply wanted to close himself off from all these people, after which he asked to kill the goblin. Then the hawk attacked him, but the enemy said that he would not always be there. One day he would finish them off. When Varen left, the hawk started to apologize, not expecting this guy to seem so greedy, but Lin calmed him down. If he had killed him, the lords of the Great Tomb would have punished him, or perhaps allowed him to take his place as ruler of the South. The goblin tried to figure out what it meant to be the ruler of the South. Maybe it meant being able to summon demons. But if he becomes a ruler, then it will no longer be possible to kill demons like now, which he doesn't even need for free. Meanwhile, one of the guy's subordinates was able to evolve and felt much larger. With one swing of his hand, he was able to cut down several trees at once, noticing a significantly increased strength. Then he went hunting to catch a huge lizard that was itself hunting. Having dragged her time, the others decided something somehow, but still more than 1.5 meters in height. It tasted fresh and sweet, no worse than human meat, and it would be great if there were more of it. Meanwhile, one of the lizard men was trying to lift the baby somewhere, who was always running and wasn't afraid that the demons would catch him. However, the girl's husband was the head, and no one would dare touch their baby. But suddenly someone's voice asked if she was looking for him. At that very second, a skeleton appeared on the ground in front of her, and then a goblin stepped forward, frightening the lizard woman. She tried to explain that this was the head's place, but the monster was not interested. He only looked at his prey. Suddenly, a lizard with a spear ran out of the house, but at the same second, the mutated goblin pierced him with his hand, coming out of disguise. The girl watched what was happening in horror, and the goblin grabbed her, deciding to leave her to the leader. Then the rest of the lizards gathered outside, realizing that they were being invaded by demons from the goblin tribe. The lizards grabbed weapons to kill the invaders, but the goblin used magic to stop them. After just a couple of minutes, they had so much food that they could indulge themselves in anything. One of the lizards wanted to strike the goblin from behind, but died before he even got close. When the goblins had eaten their fill, they decided to go back. The leader said not to exterminate them completely so that they could multiply. Surrounded by the blue flames, the surviving lizard tried to figure out where their leader had gone. Sometime later, when Varan returned to his tribe, he found only burnt houses and the bodies of the lizardmen. Suddenly, a lizard ran out to him and tearfully asked him to save the lady and the heiress, because they had been taken away by goblins. But that couldn't be. He had just returned from the goblin village, and they couldn't take revenge so quickly, and they wouldn't dare. But when he discovered that someone actually smelled like his wife and the scent of goblins was present, Varan immediately jumped up and ran back. Meanwhile, the goblins returned from hunting and announced to the chief that they had brought him something. Lin looked up and was surprised to see that they had evolved. He didn't expect that the strength of the furious goblin was almost equal to that of the earthly one. It's a pity that he is just one of the variations of the mutated one. Perhaps due to his specialization in the assassin class, his combat power is slightly higher. If he adds equipment, he can become even stronger. Then suddenly the lizard girl declared that she was the chieftain's wife, and they dare not seize her, so she would force everyone to kill them, and no one would escape. The goblin announced to the chief that they had caught them especially for him. One young, the other mature, and they were both very appetizing. Lin immediately began to ask who they had caught, and wasn't it the family of that damned praying mantis chieftain? The girl confirmed that her husband was the chief of the southern region, but even if they were scared, it was too late. The guy grinned because this was the leader of the praying mantises who threatened to divide the clan and kill him. He then silently took out his crossbow and shot at the lizard, not wanting to communicate with her any further. Lin decided to give these girls to his subordinates, for which they began to thank him. Without wasting any time, the goblins pounced on their prey, wanting to feast on it as quickly as possible. Another goblin explained to the chief that they had encountered a tribe of praying mantises and had eaten them all clean, but had left a few to multiply. Seeing the guy's menacing look, the goblins immediately shuddered and began to apologize, promising that they would not do it again. But suddenly Lin praised them, especially the furious one. This guy didn't raise him for nothing, and he knows how to capture prey and bring it back. The goblin immediately became embarrassed, deciding that the chief was overpraising him, and he did what he had to. At this time, Varan approached the tribe, menacingly ordering the goblins to come out and return his wife and daughter. But he stopped in anger, noticing how the monsters were already finishing off his family. When he learned about the two skeletons, Lin came out to him, feeling sorry that the monster had come so late. This angered Varan even more, who promised to destroy everyone and leave no one alive. He was forced to pay blood for blood, after which he began to release a poisonous cloud of smoke. However, the goblin wizard hastened to stop him, and Lin came close and plunged a knife into his stomach. Varan didn't understand how the goblin could move so quickly that he managed to lose sight of him. Since he came to die, Lin was willing to help. This is the eastern part. Most likely he won't be able to summon any monsters here. The lizard promised to destroy him even without helpers, after which he used growth stimulation. The monster felt its endless power, not understanding what the guy was going to fight him with, while the rest of the goblins noticed that this guy looked very dangerous. Lin decided to first use the earth element to slow him down, and then infect his blood. But suddenly the blade pierced the monster's chest, and a bright light gushed out from its body. To everyone's surprise, it was the holy swordswoman who had finally found the one she was looking for. The goblins immediately declared that fate had come to pass, and the holy swordswoman had killed the head of the tribe, after which they decided to detain her. But suddenly Alice simply fell, face down, losing consciousness. She caught up with them despite her fatigue and killed Varan with a rusty blade. They were lucky that she lost consciousness. The goblin wizard offered to finish her off while she was helpless, and then turned to the brothers. They immediately retreated, noticing how stubborn he was. Lin also clarified that she was unconscious, so there was no point in killing her, and her life was much more valuable. Instead, he ordered the girl to be tied up, and then the goblins dragged her into the storage room. When Alice regained consciousness, she noticed the goblin and a smile appeared on her face as she finally found him. The guy was already tense, asking her not to fuss because her energy was too low to harm them. The swordswoman began to call him a goblin without stopping, and Lin did not understand what was wrong with her, after which he ordered her to be pinned down. But instead, the goblin accidentally untied her, allowing the swordswoman to get closer to the guy, and the others thought that the end had come for the leader. But suddenly the girl hugged him by the leg and said that she did not come here to fight with him. She hoped that he would make her happy with another child. The goblins were surprised that the holy swordswoman knelt before the goblin and asked for it so directly. However, Alice wanted to get rid of the hatred between them in this way, so he must give her another child. Lynn was surprised that she wanted to have another child with him, but he wanted to know what happened to the first one. The girl's face immediately changed, and she began to apologize to the Almighty Creator for not being able to bear this punishment. Because of the cursed blood, she lost her powers, and all this together led to problems with her head. She mistakenly believed that this was a punishment from God. She killed so many of her fellow tribesmen, but if she wants to atone for her sins and have a child with him, she must fulfill certain conditions. She will only have to obey him in everything until she completes her atonement. Then she should consider it the same punishment. The guy couldn't ignore the request of such a strong warrior who knocked on their door and asked to stay, and Alice immediately agreed. Lynn took the swordswoman by the hand and led her into the depths of the room, telling the others that it was time for them to leave. Alice asked again to fulfill her wish, and the guy decided not to hold back. A little later, Lilith arrived to the tribe, who did not believe a single word of the Goblin Slayer. But when she entered the room and saw the swordswoman, she took her words back. Goblin Slayer suggested that if this news reached the Empire, something terrible would happen. Meanwhile, Lin was sitting outside drinking tea, and Yue was asking him what his plans were for the saint. He decided that she would be near him, but they had to take care of her. Dress her, wash her, and all that. The guy also asked how many people had died from the disease in recent days, asking to cook them, as he had found a worthy use for them. Death is a lizard, may attract the attention of the Tomb Lord, so it's time to visit your hawk friend. Sometime later, he reached the tribe of carnivorous eagles and declared that he had killed the Lord of the Southern Lands. It was bad, but fixable. If the guy takes the place of the ruler of the Southern Lands, then the tombs are unlikely to come to him with questions. However, the goblin was not interested in this, so he suggested that one of his subordinates take care of it. It's not that it's impossible, but this solution to the problem creates a lot of risks. The Dream Demon has been dreaming about this title for a long time. Since the lizard died, he will definitely try to take advantage of it, and his subordinates may lose. The Dream Demon is a level 8 monster that can control dreams and influence the minds of creatures while they are sleeping. But he is not strong in battle, so he never managed to defeat the previous rulers of the South. It would be cool if through this demon it was possible to instill in the saint the need to obey him. Lin asked the master if he would show him where the Dream Demon lived, as he wanted to work with him. It didn't take them long to reach their destination. At that very moment, the demon himself appeared, wondering which of them had come to him in search of new sweet dreams. Noticing the carnivorous hawk, the monster smiled, asking what he was doing here in the company of a goblin. Lin offered him cooperation. He would help him become the ruler of the Southern Lands, and the demon would send certain dreams to people. It was hard to believe that the little goblin dared to ask him to become the ruler of the South, and that the lizard, which he had been unable to cope with for several years, lost to Lin. Suddenly, the demon burst into laughter and agreed to find out whose sweet dreams he needed to correct. Meanwhile, Lin decided to go to the Great Tomb to report, asking along the way if he was sure he wanted to see a demon at the head of the Southern Lands. Don't underestimate the lizard. The fact that he defeated him doesn't mean anything, and in his lands the Lord can call upon powerful monsters for help. Lin asked the hawk to wait a little longer as he had a new plan, but the hawk clarified that the boy would not be able to absorb the demon's abilities. However, the goblin had the skill to partially fuse opponents, which could result in a random increase in stats. He was right. Ordinary goblins wouldn't be able to absorb his abilities, but Lin was different. The guy again offered the demon to discuss the details of cooperation, and would like to learn the basic principles of dream control in order to use them to the maximum. And here, everything is simple. If he looks the demon in the eyes, he will not be able to escape from the dream trap. The only exception is if the creature is stronger than the demon. Lin smiled, deciding to see which was faster, his dream magic or the goblin blade. The hawk loudly advised him not to look the demon in the eye, but it was too late. The guy immediately fell to the ground and passed out, but a moment later he opened his eyes in horror. He found himself sitting opposite a huge volcano with lava flowing out of it. The rocks crumbled beneath him, and the goblin himself began to get stuck in the lava. Watching his efforts, the demon was sure that he would not escape, and he would wander in his dreams for eternity. The monster wanted to say something else when suddenly a beam pierced his body at incredible speed. Lin figured out his trap. If a creature believed that its death in a dream was real, it would die. And in reality, that was how the ability to control dreams worked. An excellent trick, capable of deceiving most living beings, but not him. The demon rejoiced too soon. A few seconds later, he managed to get out of the dream. while the monster cursed him, promising that it would never forgive him. Then the guy took out the crossbow again, firing a projectile towards the monster. As the demon fell, Lin took advantage of its hesitation to bite off part of its arm, gaining the skill of controlling dreams. Suddenly, the goblin's hand began to grow larger, moving towards the demon to completely engulf him. When it was all over, the boy's hand returned to its place and a hawk landed behind him, asking if he was okay. He was shocked and didn't understand how the goblin did it, thinking that he couldn't handle it, but Lin didn't see anything unusual in it. The dream demon is dead, so it is necessary to decide who will rule the lands, and the hawk has promised to put in a good word for him. A little later, Lin used his new skill to get to Alice. He entered her dream, finding himself in the city, and heard people shouting that the Saint of the Sword must be punished, she cannot be released. They did not understand how a member of the Holy Church could commit such a sin, and they believed that the girl had disgraced the church. The guy realized what nightmares were tormenting her, but this was just what was needed. At that very moment, all the people were blinded by a bright light, and a warrior with 4 angelic wings appeared from the sky. Everyone immediately fell to their knees before him, realizing that they had finally met God. They then pointed to Alice, claiming that she had sinned while being a member of the Holy Church, and demanded that she be punished. People literally demanded that she be killed so that she would accept punishment for her sin. Suddenly, the ground behind Alice began to fall into the abyss as people continued to call for her death. Then the girl fell to her knees, cried, and asked the Lord to save her and forgive her sins. The warrior asked if she knew about her sin, and Alice replied that she killed the people she was supposed to protect. Killing soldiers became the least of her sins, so she must give birth to a goblin child and accept her punishment. The saint decided to ask what sin had become the most important, and received the answer that she was protecting demons. They are all selfish, immersed in greed and thirst for power, drowning in vice, seizing power and resources. When the girl realized this, she noticed that the people around her began to turn into demons. If it weren't for these people, she wouldn't have had to kill her comrades. At that very moment, the demons rushed at her, wanting to kill her, and Alice only got angry, ordering her to stop talking. Creating a fiery sword in her hand, she declared that they were a herd of monsters. But when the girl killed them all, the demons became people again, and she herself realized who she had killed. The warrior asked her to look more closely. They only longed for her protection, but they themselves were not going to protect her. As soon as the saint left the church, she became a demon and a traitor in the eyes of these people. Suddenly the girl understood everything, and the warrior advised her to exterminate demons, but she had a question about how to use divine power. Alice had to wait until all the demons in the world were exterminated, and then he would send a messenger to her who would help. After waking up from his sleep, Lin didn't expect to be so tired after using the skill, but from now on, Alice is no longer the sword saint. When Alice woke up, the guy brought her food, since they should be able to fulfill the mission of God, and she was surprised that he knew about it. Lin had no intention of revealing the truth to her, otherwise his plan would have made no sense. Divine will must remain secret, and Alice realized that the messenger God had spoken of in her dream was this goblin. It took the girl some time to realize this turn of events. She became curious about what they would do, but the guy decided to tell her about it when the time came. A little later, he was surprised that Freya was only level 60 and her combat power was below 1,000. The Holy Virgin apologized, promising to try harder, although she herself was trembling with fear. She studied magic for only a year and went on a journey as a mentor to gain experience. But she did not have time to learn much. It turns out that she is not deprived of talent, and it cannot be wasted. A few hundred tombs away, there's a city where they can get treasures, women, and food. When he heard the goblin's approving response, he ordered the weapons to be prepared as they were moving out. They say that the ruler of the city is a magician, and there are many magic books stored there, which he decided to give to Freya. The girl was very grateful to him, when suddenly Alice approached them, asking if they were going to cut everyone out. Her gaze was stern, and her armor was completely different, having similarities with demonic. If God had sent her on such a mission, she was ready for anything. These damn demons had been ruining her life for 10 years. A little later, Lin was riding on a dragon, approaching the city to assess the situation. The goblin flying next to him announced that there were quite a few people there. Perhaps there was some kind of celebration in the city. Lin ordered him to return to the camp and wait for orders, while he himself scouted out the situation. Meanwhile, the city's ruler Clin announced that his granddaughter Avril would become the new ruler, making her the youngest ruler ever. Next to him walked an innocent girl, who was also a magician. She was only 16 years old. People immediately began to wish long life to Lady Avril. They were happy that the Clin clan was protecting them. The girl thanked them for their support, promising to rule with dignity and surpass the successes of her grandfather. In addition, according to their data, the holy cage may be hiding in the city, and if someone sees it, they should immediately report its location. People again shouted that they believed in her and promised to do everything possible to help her in her new position. Clint laughed and praised his granddaughter because he didn't expect anything else from her. Sitting on the dragon, Lin could not have imagined that the first order would be to hunt for the saint, and that they would soon meet. A little later, the boy returned to the tribe and said that there were less than 6,000 soldiers in the garrison, and most of them were located in the castle. There will be no better chance to attack, so we must act immediately. Directing his army forward, the boy ordered the berserker goblin to destroy the gate. A dozen goblins carried a huge wooden battering ram, running at full speed. The painted guards noticed the goblins and immediately rushed to report it. Meanwhile, 2 guards who were below in front of the gate were killed by rifle shots. The shooters turned out to be elves who praised firearms because they were much more powerful than a bow and arrow. At this time, the goblins had already broken through the gates and began to scatter throughout the city, also occupying the walls. Lin gave the order to destroy the main combat vehicles and then gather inside. At that very moment, Clint and his granddaughter turned their heads, noticing huge explosions in the middle of the city. People were shouting that the dragon was coming, and the guards were asking them to remain calm. Wedge quickly flew into the air and ordered all soldiers to go out and defend the city from the goblin invasion. Avril was confident that the soldiers would deal with these low-ranking monsters quite quickly. She then stated that today was her birthday, so on behalf of the Clint family, she was giving everyone gifts. However, far from the palace, there was complete madness. Buildings were burning, and goblins easily dealt with soldiers. Meanwhile, Clint noticed a goblin riding a dragon. Realizing that he was the one who had defamed the Holy Swordswoman, Lin smiled, not expecting that his fame would reach this city. The old man declared that he could not hold back any longer, and then began to emit magical energy. He declared that the goblin would die here, after which he created a huge stone block and directed it at the enemy. Lin didn't expect any other technique from him, but in this case he decided to give him a surprise. The boy turned sharply, heading towards the wizard, leading a huge stone behind him. When the people realized his plan, they immediately rushed to flee to avoid being caught in the terrible attack. As Avril watched the panic, she realized how bad things were and how much danger the civilians were in. And just as Lin was about to hit the ground, the dragon suddenly lowered its head, breathing out flames and soared upward. At the last second, he managed to dodge the meteorite, which was inevitably about to collide with the ground. Avril rushed to help and used the highest magic, a spatial rift, sending the meteorite to another dimension. Meanwhile, Lin returned to the old man, who was surprised that the goblin was still alive. He was supposed to be killed by a meteorite, but the guy praised his granddaughter as the castle almost turned to ashes. Suddenly, one of the knights ran up to Clint, holding his severed arm, saying that they could no longer hold them back. The old man wanted to heal his wound, but Lin couldn't let him do that, so he tried to attack, but the man protected himself with a dome. This angered the man, who challenged the goblin to fight fairly. The boy was surprised that the wizard wanted to put pressure on his moral qualities, but the goblins had none. Lin was hiding very well, and at this rate they would soon kill their entire army, so the best solution was to retreat. The knights, who were still fighting the goblins, heard the order and began to retreat into the castle. When the gates closed, the soldiers couldn't believe that they were just goblins. They looked more like an elite squad. The people were in despair, but Lin reminded them of his promise. The Clint family would not let them be harmed. As long as they are here, no one will break in, and no one will approach them or harm them. At this time, the goblins continued to repel the attacks of the wizards from a distance, but they were not very successful. Avril noticed that they had easily killed more than 10 types of high-ranking creatures, and they definitely wouldn't dare to come close. It turns out that if she can remove them, she will become cooler than the Holy Swordswoman, and this will be only the first step to her greatness. At that very moment, Lin flew up to them, declaring that he didn't want to kill them all, but since they didn't value life so much, it was up to him. The girl smirked, noticing that he was talking too much and wanted to jump above his head. Then the guy gave the order to several goblins to follow him, and the rest should stay here. One of the wizards announced that the goblins were not leaving, but the girl asked him not to worry. The shelter was connected by magic circles that they would not be able to open. At that very moment, one of the goblins approached the dome, asking the master for permission to try to break it. Without touching him directly, the monster lowered his hands to the ground and used a high-pressure area. This force was enough to split a huge part of the dome in one fell swoop and break through. People were trembling with fear and asking where Madame Avril was and who would protect them now. As Lin walked forward, he concluded that since people were not coming out, they would come to them themselves. The knight asked Clint to open the gates to save the people, but if they go out, they will definitely die. This is their last fortress. The old man didn't expect that the magical barrier he had been creating for several years would be destroyed so quickly by this goblin. People immediately grabbed homemade weapons because their families were outside and they were going to save them. They rolled a huge stone to the gate, propping it up with beams. Havril couldn't understand what they were doing and asked them to stop because she could protect them. Suddenly, she felt some kind of force and, turning around, noticed that the rest of the wizards had fallen dead. It was the work of the elves who continued to fire their rifles, supporting their comrades from a distance. Avril asked her grandfather why the elves were in league with the goblin and what kind of weapons they had, but he couldn't answer. Suddenly, one of the elves screamed that people were kidnapping their relatives to sell them as slaves, so they needed to be taught a lesson. Then Clin used the highest magic, the Heavenly Gate, creating another barrier. He ordered his granddaughter to flee, as the Heavenly Gates would not hold for long. At that very moment, the knight announced that the goblins had broken through the barrier, and the wizard did not understand why they were so strong. Meanwhile, the people who had encountered the goblins realized that Miss Avril was not coping and called for help. Suddenly, one of them noticed a man standing on the roof, dressed in armor. Taking a closer look, they recognized the Holy Swordswoman and were confident that she would protect them. But as soon as Alice took off, she already used the highest blade technique, directing it at the gate. One blow was enough to break the barrier and the protective dome of the blade. Having risen to his feet, the old man immediately began to ask the saint what she was doing. Looking at her expression, the man realized that something was wrong with her and ordered his granddaughter to go into the barrier. After that, they turned around and ran into the next gate until the people could not believe that they were abandoned to certain death. Landing next to Alice, Lynn reminded her that to these people she was a demon. They had previously wanted to nail her to a cross, but people had asked them not to listen to his lies and they were never going to do it. People tried to justify themselves and apologize to her, admitting their mistake. However, the girl did not even listen to them and cut off the head of one of the knights. These demons hiding under the human shell had already gotten to her, so she used anti-demon techniques against them. Lynn compared the plot to the classic story of Jesus. He lived his entire life helping people, only to have them crucify him. However, Alice did not have the same unshakable faith in goodness as Jesus. Instead of dying herself, she chose to destroy her enemies, and at that time the goblin literally flew out of the building, breaking through the wall. The wounded Avril couldn't believe that the swordswoman had actually betrayed them, and if it weren't for her, the girl wouldn't be in such a lousy state. She promised herself to deal with her when she became an archmage, but as soon as she opened the door, she noticed a small goblin with a knife in his hand. This child cried and begged not to kill him, promising never to point a gun at her again. The girl's face twisted as she asked him not to show up in her sight again, and then she left silently. If he had prevented her from meeting her grandfather in the secret tunnel, she would have smashed him against the wall. But suddenly something pricked her in the neck, and the realization dawned on her. The child had bitten her. At that very moment, Lynn appeared from the portal, advising her to moderate her pride because she had too much of it. He did not find books on magic, but he did not need them now because he had discovered something much more valuable. Avril immediately admitted that the books and scrolls on magic were in a secret room in the castle, and she could take him there in exchange for mercy. But just now, she was literally shouting in the square that she would capture the Sword Saint and destroy the goblins. Now, she changes her mind too quickly, and it is unclear how such a person can inspire trust at all. She still has a lot to learn in life, and it's a good thing she didn't have time to become a full-fledged ruler. Otherwise, her people would have suffered much more. As the guy pinned her against the wall, Avril panicked, realizing what he might do. It wasn't that hard to figure her out. He was much more concerned with how big the castle's dungeons were. Suddenly, an angry voice behind him asked what the guy had done to Avril, and then a whirlwind flew towards him. Lynn used a fierce cry to repel the enemy attack. The boy was unable to completely block the blow, while Clin promised to exterminate their entire race. While casting a spell, the old man rushed to attack, when suddenly some force pushed him out of the building. While in the air, he noticed the outline of the saint, who threw a sword after him, plunging it into the wizard's chest. Lynn never expected that the new version of the holy sword would be stronger than the previous one. The mage couldn't even react, and it killed him in one move. The girl asked if there were any more targets left in the castle, but the guy answered negatively, adding that she had done a great job. He and Ephraia then made their way to the library, where thousands of books on magic were kept for them to take for themselves. The girl also began to thank him, while the guy's gaze was drawn to the mountain of jewelry. Lynn didn't expect there to be so much here. Money isn't a thing in the monster world, but gold is. At this time, the king could not believe that Alice had betrayed them, and together with the goblins attacked the city, destroying civilians. If even one word of the report turns out to be false, he is ready to execute everyone for slander. However, the knights were sure of the truth. They could never have imagined that the pathetic necks of goblins could do something like this. Suddenly, a wizard ran into the hall, reporting that the city of Kleinberg was completely lost. Goblins overran the city. At the last moment, a mage from House Klin tried to resist, but to no avail. The king was overcome with trepidation when he learned that the noble sword saint had turned her blade against her own subjects. So this goblin decided to destroy the empire, and the man had to pay for it. Rising from his seat, the king ordered all the ministers to be assembled, while he went to fetch the head of the church. A little later, he announced that Kleinberg had fallen to the empire. It was a real tragedy, and they had never suffered such a disgrace. They must remember this day forever, so the king declares war on the goblins. They must capture Alice and return the city to the crown. The Pope and the church understood why the king had called him. He hoped that the man understood the possible consequences of this action. However, the king must manage to establish peace in his lands before death overtakes him. While the horrors of the Great Tomb may be unleashed, the goblins alone will not be the end of it. The Pope decided to send envoys throughout the continent to return the saints to the churches that the empire needed. Everyone immediately accepted the new order, believing that by the will of God the empire would win. Meanwhile, the goblin crew returned home with all the loot. Suddenly, a hawk came down to them, asking the leader to follow him, because a certain gentleman wanted to see him. The boy was surprised that he would have to go to the Great Tomb so suddenly. Lin decided to ask the hawk who lived in this castle because it looked very rich. "This is a werewolf castle," the hawk replied. "Their king is a level 10 monster. The church was really hot on their heels, so they were forced to settle here. This means that not only the 4 great lords are hiding under the wing of the Great Tomb, but also several tribes of monsters. There are plenty of representatives of different races here. If his memory serves him right, they had something to do with vampires. He'll have to go back and check that out later." Having reached the place, they approached the seal, which served as a kind of elevator. The master was waiting for him below, and at that moment the platform began to descend underground, hovering in the air. Looking around, Lin noticed that this was not a great tomb, but a real monster farm. He also saw the Bone Lord, the king of the Great Tomb, on the throne, and next to him was a level 10 succubus. The Bone Lord had a high level and a total strength of 9,999, which left the boy dumbfounded. Lin felt a little nervous, trying to figure out how the old men from the church were able to defeat him. At that moment, the guy bowed, greeting the respected lord, but he shouldn't have spoken first. It was a gross mistake. But suddenly the succubus smiled, correcting him, and said that their ruler was a woman. She heard that the guy had captured Kleinberg and brought the sword saint into his tribe, and that delighted her. Lin quickly apologized, explaining that he was just lucky. It was hard for the lord to understand that a lowly goblin had only reached such a level through luck, but she had no intention of punishing him. On the contrary, she wanted to reward him. Since he wanted to plunder the resources of the monsters in her great tomb, she allowed him to do so. But in return, the guy must become the ruler of the South and be responsible for all the monsters in her tomb. Everyone present could not believe what they heard, trying to understand what was the reason for such a decision. She has her own opinion on this matter, plus he is quite capable of handling it. The mistress thought that everyone suddenly became afraid of goblins, and the succubus asked for forgiveness for having allowed herself too much. Lin couldn't believe that they were just giving him control over all the monsters in his forest. From that moment on, he became the ruler of the southern lands, received the title of Great Lord, and his tribe was allowed to hunt demonic monsters. The boy frowned and thanked her for such a generous gift, promising to protect the Great Tomb. When Yue heard this news, she immediately praised the boss. Even such a powerful being treated him well. Goblin Slayer explained to her that they would be used as meat shields. The old demoness knew that he had problems with the Empire and wants to use them against the church to reap the fruits of the confrontation. It must be taken into account that it was the church that was able to contain the mistress and all the undead of the Great Tomb. The guy has a plan, but they don't have to worry. He will be the winner in any trouble, not his enemies. In the current storyline, in 6 months, the church army will attack the Great Tomb, and his tribe will be crushed. Even the strength of the elite goblins is not enough to resist the warriors of the church, and he will have to fight both the church and the monsters. Now he was trying to figure out if there was a way to increase his strength to the epic rank. Alice said it wasn't difficult. All you needed was good equipment, like the ring on his finger. Goblins can only craft light armor. If they had enough magic items, it would help them gain a boost in strength. He then asked the girl if she knew a way to get more magical items, as he wanted to create a legion of strong warriors. Magic items have become extremely rare. Since the gnomes disappeared, there are much fewer people who understand artifacts. The gnomes simply disappeared, no sign of them. Many believe that they died out. Perhaps acquaintances from the Great Tomb know something. There is no point in going to the mistress. She will immediately understand why the guy needs this information. But as for the rest, it is worth thinking about. Suddenly, Lin remembered that there was also a dragon tribe, and he completely forgot about Phoebas. The next day, he went to the island but did not find a single dragon. The boy realized that Phoebas had told him this before she was going to return to her clan, but a year had passed since then. Most likely they are not here, and after 5 days he was able to reach the great tree, where he discovered the dragons. As Lin descended, he was surrounded by dragons, and tried to explain that he was a friend of the purple mother of dragons, and had no evil intentions. Upon hearing the name Phoebus, all the dragons immediately assumed that the father of despair had arrived to visit them. At first, the guy couldn't understand who they were talking about since he didn't know what had happened over the past year. Phoebus is the name of the purple mother of dragons, and Despair is her son named Nidhogg. If this was the case, Lin asked permission to take him to her. After thinking for a moment, the dragon agreed, but warned that the vile red dragon must wait outside. Otherwise, he would be roasted. The other dragons watching the boy could not believe that he was Nidhogg's father. However, if this is true and he tells his son about them, they will all be in danger. Then the boy was told to go alone. If he really was Nidhogg's father, they would come back for him later. After making his way through the volcano, Lin discovered the gnawed skeletons of huge dragons. Suddenly, he came across a dragon that was tens of times larger than its relatives. The dragon immediately let out a deafening roar, deciding to find out who he was and how he dared to come here. Lin held out his hand in front of him and asked him to stop. To his surprise, the dragon obeyed. The guy asked if Phoebus was his mother, because if so, then it means that Lin is his father. However, the dragon did not believe him, being sure that his father was a goblin, and Lin realized that he had never seen goblins. The monster lowered its head, sniffed and smelled a scent similar to its own, after which it began to transform. Taking on a female form, the girl invited him to go with her to her mother, but warned that if he was lying, she would tear him to pieces.